Chapter 607. On top of the dome, the golden clouds were shining and the clouds were reflecting the air. It looked like a golden cocoon. When the 9 underworld's sorrowful wind came in contact with it, thousands of rays of light burst out. However, the situation was completely different from when they were pushing forward as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. This time, they were firmly blocked outside. Although Zhang Yan had used the Goldnet Earthshaft talisman, he didn't know if this talisman could withstand the 9th hell demonic wind, so he didn't let his guard down. Once there was a change, he would use the lofty cloud tower to block it. If it was only for a few breaths of time, he would still be able to withstand it. At this moment, when he saw that the wind couldn't invade him, he completely relaxed. Feng Haiyang saw that he could not break through Zhang Yan's defense even after using all his methods. He felt that there was no need to fight anymore. He thought to himself, since Zhang Yan is doing this, he must have some tricks up his sleeves. Since I can't do anything to him, there is no need for me to fight him head-on. I will just find a way to escape. With this thought, he shouted in a low voice and used a sign to keep the tribulation water. Then he used the underworld escaping technique and turned into a wisp of smoke, flying toward the location of the Junyang pot. He wanted to take advantage of this time to get the Junyang pot. Zhang Yan looked at the direction where Feng Haiyang was retreating and guessed his intention. His eyes flashed, but he did not stop him. He continued to use the true light of fire. Although the Junyang pot had jumped away, it had not been long and had not escaped from the mountain. When Feng Haiyang arrived, he found it after searching for a while. Just as he was about to take out the talisman to guide the Junyang pot, he suddenly thought of something. He frowned and thought to himself, "No, I almost got tricked." The Junyang pot could not be placed in his sleeve and could only be carried by his side. If someone else used the talisman to guide the Junyang pot, although the Junyang pot might not be able to escape, it would still respond. If he took it when he used the Junyang pot, it would expose his real body. However, there was a high possibility that he would expose his true body, and his greatest advantage would be destroyed invisibly. If he was fighting with other Xianmen cultivators, he did not have to worry about it. However, Zhang Yan was different. He had to be careful. Feng Haiyang couldn't help but shake his head. It seemed like he could only let this treasured pot run wild for a while longer. At the same time, Zhang Yan's fire element true light had already accumulated to the peak, and if he were to continue, then he would probably be unable to control it. He raised his index finger and pointed. All of a sudden, the true light of fire element shrunk into one spot, transforming into thousands of beams of scorching red light. The top part of the light dispersed, while the bottom part of the light converged, looking like a red lotus, hanging at the top. With another incantation, it was pulled into the astral cloud. He continuously used his Dao techniques and the golden sieve talisman. Even though his Dan was of the 1st grade, he still felt that his spiritual power was greatly depleted. As he thought of this, he took a step, and the water element true light twisted back and forth. He had already scattered Gao Ruowang's soul, turning it into a ball of pure essence energy. He moved it in front of him and gently inhaled. It entered through his nose and mouth and was absorbed by the 9 subduing magic slip. After a short while, he felt a continuous stream of essence qi pouring into his body, and his magic power recovered a little. With a soft shout, he withdrew the golden light that was protecting him. He looked around and confirmed where Feng Haiyang was. Then, he flew up with the help of his sword and turned into a golden rainbow, charging over. Feng Haiyang knew that just now, Zhang Yan's actions would not be useless. Before he understood everything, he did not want to fight him head-on. He thought to himself, although Zhang Yan's sword escape technique is brilliant, he is not a Shaoqing disciple after all. He does not have the true inheritance. I would like to see if his sword escape technique is more powerful, or if my Netherworld Spring Sect's Yellow Springs escape technique is more powerful. He smiled coldly, and suddenly turned into a yellow smoke. He did not go up into the sky, but into the ground, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The Yellow Springs escape technique could allow one to go up into the sky and into the ground, concealing one's tracks. Especially after one's body turned into a shadow, one could even move freely under the surface of a mountain. This flying peak was huge and it was thousands of meters tall. It was unknown where he would appear in the next moment. Zhang Yan raised his brows. Just now, Feng Haiyang had clearly seen his earth-forming steel technique, but he still dared to come here. He should have something to rely on. Zhang Yan thought for a while, and decided not to do such a useless thing. In an instant he arrived in front of the mountain rock. Without dodging, he activated the earth escape technique and went straight up. In an instant he entered from the outside and passed through the mud and rocks without any hindrance. He followed the wisp of spiritual vigor and chased after it. Feng Haiyang naturally noticed the situation behind him. Seeing that Zhang Yan was also passing through the mountain rock with ease, he could not help but reveal an expression of disbelief. Not only does this Qinsong disciple have vigorous mana, but he also has many divine powers. It was said that he had only entered Tao for 100 years, and his master was not a Taoist abode master. How did he cultivate all these? He shook his head and did not want to be entangled here. He circulated his mana and rushed out of the flying peak. In the blink of an eye, Zhang Yan also broke out of the ground on his sword and chased after him. Half a day later, only a rolling yellow smoke could be seen flying in front of him, and a strip-like sword gleam was chasing after him. Zhang Yan saw that Feng Haiyang was only flying in front of him, and did not come back to fight. He pondered for a while, and he could somewhat guess Feng Haiyang's intention. Feng Haiyang probably saw that he spent a lot of effort to activate the fire element true light, so he purposely flew in the sky, and wanted to use this opportunity to break the Tao technique. Generally speaking, once a spell was activated, it would require more mana to sustain it. If it was delayed for too long, even if it did not hurt the opponent, it would have to dissipate on its own. Zhang Yan secretly nodded. Feng Haiyang's opponent was indeed Daoran, and every step he took was not without purpose. If it was someone else, he would have been dragged on for a long time, and in the end, he would only be wasting his mana. However, how could he not have thought of this beforehand? The fire element true light wasn't something without a foundation. Within the high cloud, the 5 elements were circulating in a cycle. Even if he had yet to fully utilize this technique, it would not consume much of his mana. Therefore, this was destined to be a useless move. The two of them chased each other, and after 15 minutes, they returned to the Star Stone South Road. This place was filled with flying peaks, and it was different from other places. At this point, Feng Haiyang's escape became erratic. Sometimes he would go left, sometimes he would go right. Sometimes he would go into the mountains, and sometimes he would disappear without a trace. As he flew and turned, his route was extremely strange. He was using the terrain to his advantage, and he was using his escape technique to the extreme. It was obvious that he had planned this before he came here. Feng Haiyang thought to himself, after so long, the Tao technique should have dissipated by now. However, Zhang Yan cannot be judged with common sense. I need to be careful. There is no need to fight him face to face, because I need to find another way to deal with him. After pondering for a while, he came up with a plan. With a shout, he increased his speed by a bit. Zhang Yan, of course, would not allow him to escape. He yelled and used a little of his mana. Then, he followed behind Feng Haiyang steadily. He knew that Feng Haiyang must have used up a lot of his mana. There were only the two of them here, and Feng Haiyang did not have any cultivator's blood to replenish his energy. If this dragged on, the situation would only get worse for him. There was no need for him to be anxious. The two of them had been flying for about an hour, and they had made countless turns between the peaks and rocks. Suddenly, Feng Haiyang swayed his body and turned to the edge of a flying peak. Coincidentally, there was a huge waterfall rolling down there, and he disappeared in a flash. Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed, and he followed behind. As soon as he entered the waterfall, he suddenly felt an enormous pressure pressing down from all directions, and his body couldn't help but stiffen. This feeling was clearly that of falling into a divine ability that sealed the heavens and the earth. At this moment, he heard a shrill scream. 2 demons appeared from the void, one on the left and the other on the right. They spread their arms and legs, rushed forward, and hugged him tightly. At practically the exact same moment, a ghastly white ray of light flew out from space in front of him, and it swiftly shot over. It slashed onto his neck, and even though it didn't injure him at all, it successfully caused him to be unable to shout loudly. Feng Haiyang stepped out from the cliff behind Zhang Yan. A cold light appeared in his eyes. He shook his sleeve, and with a rumble, a ball of black wind and hell chi appeared. The reason he was circling around here just now was because he was looking for a suitable place to strike. With the two devils restraining him, even the minor universe teleportation wouldn't be able to move. For the sake of safety, he summoned the dark battle axe of darkness as well, hoping to succeed in a single strike. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. At this moment, he was indeed unable to use the minor universe teleportation, but besides that, there was no other way. At this critical moment, he thought of something, and he disappeared with the two demons. He actually used the water to escape, and when he appeared again, he was already on the peak of the mountain. The two demons sensed that the situation was not right and suddenly panicked. They wanted to escape, but how could they? They just moved a little and were trapped by two black chains, unable to break free. At this moment, a golden light flew down and spun a few times in the air. Both of them let out a wail, and then collapsed into two balls of essence chi. Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back. A clear sound came from between his eyebrows, and an invisible force seemed to be emitted, sucking them into his mouth and nose. The two demons were broken, and if Feng Haiyang's claws and teeth were broken, only the dark battle axe of darkness was left, and there was no need to worry about it. He shook his shoulders, activated the mysterious technique, and stamped his feet. With a rumble, the whole mountain under his feet exploded. When he saw a wisp of yellow smoke flying out, he let out a shout and took a step forward, executing the minor heavens escape technique. In an instant, he was already in front of the wisp of yellow smoke. With a flick of his sleeve, more than 365 drops of heavy water flew out at the same time, almost covering the entire sky. Feng Haiyang's expression changed. At such a close distance, there was no way for him to dodge. He made a hand seal, and an evil aura flew out, covering his whole body. For the first time, he actually propped up his protective light, and the dark heavy water crashed into it, bouncing off. However, the drop of Xianming heavy water was also mixed in with the attack, and as soon as it collided with the treasure light, it exploded. The remaining force did not stop, and it rushed inside, hitting Feng Haiyang's chest, and with a bang, it smashed him into pieces that filled the sky. At this moment, a loud rumble was heard, and the flying mountains in all directions were smashed into pieces. A tumbling wave of tribulation water spread out, and not long after, it spread for more than 20 miles, looking extremely vast. Chapter 608. After the manifestation of Feng Hai's magic power was dispersed once again, he had already dived into the depths of the calamity water. At this moment, he suddenly saw a crimson ray of light shooting over. Everywhere the ordinary light passed by, the surrounding calamity water instantly melted and disintegrated, no longer existing. Feng Haiyang's eyes narrowed. He could tell that this fire was a great threat. He couldn't let it continue, or else the calamity water would be broken. If he was at his peak, it would be easy to deal with this. All he had to do was use all his mana to fight back. But now, his mana was not as strong as before, so he had to change his strategy. In this sword fight, he either expelled or killed the disciples of Xian Men. He thought he could stop Jun Yang's qi from flowing into Xian Men, but he didn't expect that he would be forced into such a difficult situation by Zhang Yan. If he wasn't careful, he could die here. He took a deep breath and suppressed his thoughts. He made a few hand signs, and before the calamity water and the true light touched each other, he parted the calamity water and dodged it. How could Zhang Yan allow that to happen? With a point of his finger, the scarlet flame surged and shot out like a flaming arrow, invading forward. However, every time it neared, the tribulation water would always be able to avoid it. Even if it came into contact with the tribulation water for a moment, it would only be refined a little and not much damage. If this were to continue, perhaps before the tribulation water could be refined by 20 to 30%, the fire element true light would be exhausted first. There was a look of admiration in Zhang Yan's eyes. Feng Haiyang was indeed a cultivator from the Devil's Doctrine who had reached the nascent soul realm for almost 300 years. His control of the Calamity Water was extremely exquisite. Even though his mana seemed to be lacking, he was not at a disadvantage in a head-on battle. He had cultivated for more than 100 years, but he wasn't as good as someone like Feng Haiyang. However, he had a plan. His eyes flashed. "You're using tricks. You're using tricks, then I'll break it with force." With a deep shout, he scattered the remnant bodies of the 3 elders of the Devil sect. Then, he activated the 9 subduing Devil Slip and turned it into his own magical power in one breath. Immediately, he became 100 times more spirited. With a turn of his technique, his body rose up, and in an instant, he became 1,000 feet tall, towering like a mountain. He reached the clouds. Zhang Yan lowered his head and looked down. He mustered all his strength and punched the black water below him. When the invisible force passed by, it was like a violent gale. For a moment, there was no sound between heaven and earth. The surging water suddenly became sluggish, and a section of it caved in. After a while, the sound of the sky collapsing was heard. That section of the tribulation water suddenly cracked and turned into water droplets that filled the sky. The scarlet flame true light at the top followed, swooshing up and nibbling away at it. Within a radius of a few li, the area was engulfed in flames. It was like a burning river and boiling the sea, causing a myriad of strands of muddy air to rise into the air. After unleashing this attack, Zhang Yan suddenly let out a long roar and stepped forward. With every step he took, he would throw a punch. The tribulation water below exploded one after another with the force of mountains being split apart. Rumbling noises rumbled. The previous sounds had just faded when the latter sounds arrived again, and they came over and over again without end. In the face of such an earth-shattering and violent attack, any kind of subtle change would be useless. Feng Haiyang tried to move forward a few times, but he could not find a chance to use his techniques. He had no choice but to retreat and temporarily avoid the attack. When he was far away, he kept thinking of a plan in his mind. He thought to himself, although I can immediately withdraw the tribulation water and leave, that would expose my real body. Zhang Yan's movement technique is brilliant, and he has many unpredictable tricks up his sleeves. I can't use this method. Although he could withdraw the tribulation water as he wished, the faster he withdrew it, the more mana he would have to expend. Moreover, Zhang Yan was using his strength to suppress him. If he did not think of a good plan quickly, even if he escaped, it would only delay him for a short while, and it would still be useless. After thinking for a while, he quietly checked his mana. Right now, his mana was less than a third of what it used to be. If he continued to fight like this, he would at most be able to hold on for 2 to 4 hours. If he still could not defeat Zhang Yan within this period of time, then it would be impossible for him to defeat his opponent. Zhang Yan has a technique that uses strength. If I want to kill him, I have to kill him in one hit. If I don't, then I won't be able to win. It looks like I have to use that technique. He was a very resilient person. Even under such a disadvantageous situation, he did not lose his will to fight. After thinking about it, he took out his technique and disappeared. When he reappeared, he was standing on top of the tribulation water. Zhang Yan was swinging his fists and breaking through the tribulation water. Suddenly, he felt something and turned around to look. He saw Feng Haiyang coming out. Without hesitation, he turned around and punched him. With a loud bang, he crushed his opponent into pieces. After a few breaths, Feng Haiyang's silhouette reappeared on the other side. It looked like he was about to get close to Zhang Yan and unleash a technique. Zhang Yan summoned his technique and shouted. His voice was so loud that it shattered Feng Haiyang's body. Feng Haiyang continued to summon his spiritual energy to materialize his body. However, he was repeatedly attacked by Zhang Yan. After a few dozen times, he felt that his spiritual energy was running out. When he looked over, he saw that Zhang Yan was still full of energy and did not look like he was running out of energy. Feng Haiyang guessed that Zhang Yan must have the ability to replenish his spiritual energy. However, Feng Haiyang's expression was calm and he was not flustered. To him, even if he still had a little bit of spiritual energy left, As long as he had the opportunity, he could turn the tables. After a while, a sharp light shot out of his eyes. He formed a spell with his hand and transformed again. Zhang Yan instantly noticed it when he saw it emerge from the tribulation water again, and he swung his fist over again. But right at this moment, a ghastly white light flew over from the sky, and in an instant, it arrived before his face. He didn't dodge, and instead opened his mouth to spit out a bolt of purple lightning that was as thick as an arm, and it struck right onto the dark saber of darkness. With a bang, the magic treasure was actually shattered into pieces. But at this moment, a shadow suddenly flew out from within, and it charged over with incomparably swift speed, and it scuttled into his mouth and nose. When Feng Haiyang saw this scene, the light in his eyes intensified. That black shadow was the divine soul of the elder that was attached to the Yin battle axe. He had done so much earlier in order to stall for time and help the elder undo the seal on the battle axe. Although the method of strength focused on the physical body, it was not that there was no way to break it. As long as one was still a human, there would be 7 orifices. This was the door to enter and exit. If one had a good method, they could find this way to injure the enemy's spirit. For example, his soul-dispersing 3 dispelling chi was this kind of supernatural power. If a cultivator looked at it, they would easily faint. The spirit of the people in the Xian Gate was usually not as good as the cultivators of the devil sect. After the elder's spirit entered Zhang Yan's body, there would definitely be a fight between them. It would be best if Zhang Yan could win, but it did not matter if he couldn't. As long as the stalemate lasted for a while, Feng Haiyang would have an opportunity to take advantage of. With this plan, he thought that he had a high chance of winning. Zhang Yan had been hit by the dark battle axe twice before, but he was not injured at all. He would not pay too much attention to this treasure. Even if someone was on guard, they would never think that there was an elder of the Netherworld Spring sect hiding inside. As expected, as soon as the shadow entered his body, Zhang Yan's body suddenly trembled. It was as if he was frozen and could not move. Feng Haihai's eyes lit up. How could he let go of such an opportunity? He scoffed and stirred up the last bit of water from his tribulation. It gathered into a huge wave that was 1,000 feet tall and rushed towards his enemy. Then he leaped forward and gathered all the mana that was left in his body. He waved his sleeves and a huge ball of black wind that was swirling endlessly appeared. Unexpectedly, right at this moment, Zhang Yan suddenly opened his eyes, and a dim light flickered within his eyes that were extremely deep. He actually didn't seem to be affected in the slightest, and he let out a long laugh as his figure suddenly returned to its original state, and then he leaped up to avoid the 9 sorrowful gale that came straight at him. After he arrived in the clouds, he suddenly turned around and shot down from the sky like a bolt of lightning. Feng Haiyang's expression suddenly changed. He looked at the heavenly sword ray in the sky with fear. At that moment, he had used up all his tricks and there was no way he could turn the tables. But even at this point, he wasn't willing to just resign himself to death. He closed his eyes, and a rumbling sound rang out as his body suddenly transformed into a wisp of wispy smoke that shot off into the distance. His speed was so swift that it was actually unprecedented. Returning to the source and merging? Zhang Yan immediately recognized that this was Feng Haiyang's real body sacrifice technique. He wanted to call back his Yuanying Dharmakaya. Although a cultivator in the 3rd Yuanying realm could release his Dharmakaya to fight, his physical body could not defend itself. Therefore, in times of danger, he could use his profound chi to call back his Dharmakaya. Once this technique was used, the Dharmakaya would turn into a wisp of smoke and return to his body at an incredible speed. Feng Haiyang was running away. Zhang Yan's eyes sharpened. He immediately used the minor universe movement technique and chased after him. But even though he used the technique repeatedly, the wisp of smoke in front of him was getting faster and faster. It was about to get out of his sight. His expression was unusually calm. If he was Feng Haiyang, he would definitely calculate the time and use the talisman in advance. When the Dharmakaya returned to his body, he would be able to escape from the star stone. If it really came to that, it would not be a problem. With this person's half-crippled body, he would not be able to use any supernatural powers or Dao techniques. Now that he had killed all the guardian elders of the Nether Spring sect, he could order the dragon carp to find a way to kill him. However, Feng Haiyang had seen all the skills and supernatural powers of his sect. It would be best if he could kill him here. But with the minor universe movement technique, he might not be able to catch up with him. Zhang Yan changed his mind and said, "I thought I would not need to use this item. Now it seems like I have to use it." He chanted a technique and flicked his finger. A clear light flew out and turned into a square black flying pavilion that was 10 feet tall. It was a spell to summon the demonic treasury. He waved his sleeves and stepped into the door. He floated up to the 3rd floor and pressed on the mechanism. He poured his mana into it. With a loud bang, the flying pavilion suddenly moved. When it appeared again, it was already more than 20 miles away. When he was at the Mystic Light realm, this demonic treasury could already move 6 to 7 miles in one breath. Now that he was using it with his Yuanian cultivation, it was even more extraordinary. After using it a few times, he had already caught up with Feng Haiyang's Dharmakaya. Just when he was about to attack, he suddenly felt something. He looked up and saw a person in a yellow robe standing on the peak of a mountain 100 miles away from the west. The talisman beside him had already floated into the air. Zhang Yan's eyes suddenly became sharper. He suddenly moved his mana. After the demonic treasury trembled a few times, it was already in the sky. Then he let out a long roar and leaped up. He became one with the sword and turned into a clear sword light that cut through the air. Feng Haiyang's expression changed drastically. Then, he said coldly, "Within 1,000 years, there will be 3 great calamities. Can Taoist Zhang avoid them?" Chapter 609. P.S. I've been sick for the past 2 days and I haven't recovered yet. I'm sorry for the delay in updating. After Zhang Yan spoke, he used his qi to check. His eyes flickered. As expected, Feng Haiyang's soul wasn't here. His physical body only had a strand of God's will attached to it because it was still in the body. He used his magic power to disperse the strand of divine will. Then, he shook his sleeve and kept the head and the body into the water element true light. With a tap of his foot, he rode the conveyance light and flew into the sky. When he raised his eyes to look over, he immediately saw the nascent soul Dharma body that had transformed into smoke and flown away. However, its magic power had been exhausted a long time ago, and its physical body had been killed. It was like a tree without roots or water without a source, and it didn't pose the slightest threat to him. He shouted and turned into a rainbow. When he got close, he released a ray of water light. It rolled back and forth and kept it. Then, he controlled the water to twist it and it dispersed into a ball of qi. At this moment, he had finally killed this person. The talisman that was floating in the sky was originally shining with a golden light. It was a sign that it was about to be activated. Then, it suddenly shook and the light dispersed. It slowly floated down. Zhang Yan raised his hand and summoned it from afar. He took a look at it and casually placed it into his sleeve. With Feng Haiyang gone, he was the only one left in the Star Stone. However, there was still a hidden danger that needed to be solved. He circled the sky and found a flying mountain to descend on. He sat down cross-legged, and his mind sank. He had already entered his own sea of consciousness. Looking around, there was no end to this place. There was only a bright galaxy and he was standing in the middle. Not far away, there was a crystal-clear jade scroll that was similar to his body. At this moment, a 5 or 6-year-old boy was being suppressed under it. Although he looked like he was made of jade, his eyes were blood red. There was a green vertical line between his eyebrows that extended into his hair. He was letting out a thunderous roar and his entire body was filled with a crazy and violent aura. This person was the elder of the demonic doctrine who was hiding in the dark acts of Damien. Just now, the moment it entered his body, it was suppressed by the 9 subduing magic slip. However, at that time, there was still a great enemy like Feng Haiyang in front of him, so he did not have the time to care about it. Zhang Yan gave it a few indifferent glances and formed a hand seal. The demon vanquishing slip suddenly emitted a melodious sound. Immediately, strands of propitious qi drifted down. When they reached the bottom, they condensed into golden flowers of multicolored energy. Fragrant clouds drifted about, incomparably brilliant. When it landed on the Devil Sect Elder's body, it was as if a layer of devil chi had been removed, and his body also dimmed a little. After dozens of them, the boy's body gradually turned incorporeal, and a look of fear appeared on his face. "Fellow Taoist, please don't attack me again. Can you let me go? If you let me go, I can tell you many secrets." Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled. "I won't hide it from you. Even if you tell me the secret, I will still eliminate you today." The elder of the Devil Sect rolled his eyes. He said loudly, "Since fellow Taoist is here, has my martial nephew Feng lost? Let me tell fellow Taoist, before he came to fight, he had already sealed a part of his soul in the ancestral hall. This is a secret technique of the Netherworld Spring Sect. Even if he is killed by you here, if he has a fortuitous encounter, he will be able to cultivate back." Zhang Yan smiled and did not mind at all. He was not even afraid of Feng Haiyang himself, let alone a part of his soul. Let's take a step back. Even if Feng Haiyang obtained a great fortuitous encounter and could cultivate back, it would be several hundred years later. How would he be able to compete with me then? When the Devil Sect elder saw that he was unmoved, he became even more anxious. He continuously revealed many secrets, hoping that he would stop. However, Zhang Yan did not care at all and only focused on activating the devil's subduing slip. It was obvious that he was determined to kill him here. When the Devil Sect elder saw his body gradually turn into mist, he knew that he had no chance of survival and stopped begging for mercy. Instead, he laughed coldly. "Zhang Yan, you may have defeated my martial nephew Feng, but you don't know that you are in big trouble. Martial nephew Feng and my martial nephew Yuan Hongyang have always been good friends. Martial nephew Feng's techniques were taught by him on behalf of his master. Now that you have killed martial nephew Feng, he will definitely seek revenge on you." "Yuan Hongyang?" Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He had never heard of this name before, but from what this person said, it seemed to be an extraordinary person. He memorized this name and prepared to ask Zhou Chongju when he returned to see if he knew anything about this person's background. After thinking about it, he quickly made hand signs and continuously activated the devil's subduing slip. Not long after, the Devil Sect elder let out a cry and his body disappeared without a trace. He had already been refined by him. Zhang Yan's consciousness left his sea of consciousness and opened his eyes. He fluttered his clothes and stood up. He looked up to determine the direction and flew east, preparing to find the Junyang pot again. Because of the assistance of the moon cleansing treasured mirror, he found this treasured pot on a mountain after only an hour. He first found a smooth blue stone and sat down. With a flip of his palm, he took Feng Haiyang's sleeve. According to what he knew, Feng Haiyang had obtained a total of 4 talismans. Now that he carefully counted them, he found that the number was correct. However, 2 of them had already taken Junyang's essence chi. Zhang Yan also guessed that when this person entered the 3rd stage of yuanying, he used one of the talismans, but he didn't know where the other one was used. These 2 talismans, plus the talisman that he had, made a total of 3 talismans, and he could also take 3 portions of Junyang's essence chi. Sect leader Qin had promised him that he could decide what he wanted during the sword fight. Therefore, he didn't have the same concerns as the disciples of other sections. He was prepared to absorb Junyang's essence chi while cultivating in this star stone. This way, he could get twice the result with half the effort. After 3 years, he would definitely have a great increase. Because he was afraid that he might have missed something, he carefully checked Feng Haiyang's sleeve again before cultivating. Just now, he only cared about the talisman and didn't care about anything else. Now that he had a look, his eyes suddenly brightened. He took out a sword pill that was the size of a goose egg. However, it was gray and looked ordinary, as if it had lost its spirit. He pondered for a while and held the sword pill in his palm. He used his spirit will to explore it. Suddenly, the sword pill shook and made a loud and clear sword sound. A sharp chi rushed toward him. At this moment, the sword pill between his eyebrows also jumped, and he heard a chang sound. The 2 sword wills collided in the air, and then both retreated. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised and thought to himself, this sword orb has obviously not been refined by anyone for a long time, and its spirituality is muddled, but I didn't expect it to still have such a sharp sword intent. If its owner is still alive, he must not be an ordinary person. If I'm not wrong, this thing should be left behind by Ban Xiaoming. With a thought, he put the sword orb away solemnly. After a while, he took care of everything and thought, the outcome of this sword battle has been decided. I might as well inform my disciple and my fellow Taoists. He first took out Feng Haiyang's head and placed it in front of him. Then he took out a talisman. His expression turned serious, and he chanted an incantation. He pointed at the talisman and said, "Go!" After a while, the talisman shook and suddenly burst out with a shining brilliance. It circled in the air and covered the head. With a rumble, it turned into a golden light and rushed out of the star stone. At this moment, in Chengyuan Gorge, the people from the 10 sects and the thousands of cultivators on both sides of the river were anxiously waiting for the result of the sword battle. Yadaoren walked in circles and looked at the sky from time to time. He seemed to be anxious and said, "Senior martial brother, it's been so long. Why hasn't fellow Taoist Zhang and Feng Haiyang decided the winner?" Elder Lu's expression was the same as usual. He glanced at the Qinsong school and said, "Fellow Taoists from the Qinsong school are not anxious. Why is junior martial brother like this?" Yadaoren stomped his feet and sighed, "How can I not be anxious? If the devil sect wins this sword battle, then Jun Yang's spiritual essence." He was halfway through his sentence when he suddenly wanted to stop. However, Elder Lu knew what he was thinking. Before coming here for the sword battle, the 10 sects masters had discussed the ownership of Jun Yang's spiritual essence. If the profound sect won, Bu Tian Pavilion might also get a share. Their hard work this time would not be in vain. However, if the devil sect won, then there would be no hope. Elder Lu shook his head and said, "Junior martial brother, don't think too much. That Zhenren Zhang came here in the name of the Yaoyin clan, but he is not one of the 10 sects of the profound sect. Even if he really wins, that Jun Yang's spiritual essence might not be dealt with like what the 10 sects masters had discussed. Junior martial brother, don't think too much." Yadaoren was stunned for a moment. He then frowned and thought for a while. However, he did not think much of it and said, "This is just a scheme of the Qinsong school. Zhenren Zhang is a disciple of the Qinsong school after all. How would he dare to risk the world's condemnation?" Elder Lu did not argue with him and only said, "The outcome has not been decided yet. It's too early to say. Let's just watch." After waiting for a long time, there was a sudden gust of wind in the sky and spiritual opportunity was stirred up. Everyone noticed it and looked up at the same time. Yadaoren also looked over anxiously. He saw a dazzling golden light piercing through the clouds and rumbling. However, it was too fast for him to see who was in it. However, when he looked at the direction it was heading towards, it was falling towards the peak of the Yaoyin clan. His face immediately turned ashen and he said dejectedly, we lost, we still lost." Elder Lu's face did not look too good either. He frowned. On the peak of the Qinsong school, Huoxian's heart sank when he saw the situation. He took a step forward and stared at the golden light. His eyes were sharp. He could faintly see that the thing wrapped in the light seemed to be a human head. His pupils could not help but freeze. Zhong Muqing let out a long sigh and said, "Junior martial brother Zhang is a genius. His aptitude is so high that no one in our generation can compare to him. I didn't expect." Luo Qingyu looked at it in disbelief and said, "Junior martial brother Zhang died just like that?" The atmosphere on the peak became extremely depressing. Huoxian let out a sigh and said in a deep voice, "Junior martial brother Zhang is a disciple of the Qinsong school after all. His remains should be sent back to the mountain and handed over to his eldest disciple, Lu Yin. I only hope that his primordial spirit still exists so that there is a chance for him to be reincarnated." At this moment, the thousands of cultivators on both sides of the river were shocked when they saw the scene. Some were lost, some were anxious, and some were dejected. All kinds of reactions were different. For the past 10,000 years, no matter how the situation in the Donghua continent changed, the Shen men were always the winners. Now that the devil's calamity had started, they were actually defeated. When they thought that the devil's calamity would still last for 1,000 years, they were even more uneasy. The 10 Xianmen sects were still fine, but how could they, the small sects, withstand the oncoming devil's flame? Chapter 610. P.S. My body is feeling better. Come down and update as usual. The golden light was extremely fast. In just a few breaths, it shot down from the sky and landed on the peak occupied by the Yaoyin clan. At first, Wei Zihong and the others thought that it was Zhang Yan who had returned and were ready to welcome him. However, after the light landed on the ground, it suddenly dissipated and a head rolled out. Wei Zihong's heart skipped a beat. He calmed down a little and looked over. With this look, he was stunned at first, then he was overjoyed. He took a few steps forward and said excitedly, "Isn't this the devil sect cultivator Feng Haiyang?" Zhang Boyan looked at the head and couldn't help but reveal a complicated expression. Lu Meinyang was also worried about Zhang Yan's safety. Now she was relieved and revealed a smile. She came up and bowed to Wei Zihong and said, "Congratulations, sect leader Wei. Taoist Master Zhang defeated Feng Haiyang this time. He is the number 1 in the 18 sects sword competition." Wei Zihong seemed to have thought of something when he was reminded by her. He turned around and looked at the two of them. He said, "Since Master killed this person, I, as a disciple, should spread the name of my master." Lu Meinyang hesitated and said, "Sect leader Wei, should we wait for Taoist Master Zhang to return before making a decision?" Wei Zihong smiled and said, "There's no need for that. Since Master has passed down this head, then he has no intention of concealing it. Besides, everyone in the world will find out about this sooner or later, so why is there a need to conceal it? It won't show that my Yaoyin clan is stingy." Lu Meinyang lowered her head and thought about it. She felt that what he said was reasonable, so she nodded and didn't say anything more. At this moment, they suddenly heard the sound of a bell on the Dan lifting peak. Not long after, they saw streaks of light on the peaks on both sides of the Chengyuan Gorge, all rushing towards the source of the sound. Wei Zihong could tell that this was a gathering of the various sects of the celestial sect to discuss matters. His heart could not help but move. He first looked at the expressionless Zhang Boyan, then turned to Lu Meinyang and cupped his hands. He said politely, "I wish to make a trip to Qinggan Peak to inform the seniors of this matter. Jinren Lu, please send me there." Although he was the sect master of the Yaoyin sect, he was only a core formation cultivator after all. It was inevitable that the quantity would not be enough. Therefore, he needed Lu Meinyang to go with him. Originally, he would have asked Zhang Boyan to go with him. But this person was not familiar with him and he was once a disciple of the devil sect. It wasn't convenient to invite him. Lu Meinyang gladly agreed. She raised her slender hand and pointed downwards. Immediately, an elegant white smoke rose from her lotus feet. She said, "Sect leader Wei, please come up. Let I escort you." Wei Zihong waved his hand. He put the head into his hand and took out a box. He put it away and hid it in his sleeve. Then he said his thanks and floated up the cloud. Lu Meinyang rose into the air and flew towards the pill-raising peak at a steady pace. The two of them did not travel for long. He had already arrived at the peak of the mountain and landed on the open space in front of the main hall. At this moment, Pingdu Sect's elder Hua was walking towards the hall. When she sensed someone approaching, she casually turned around and frowned. He pointed and asked, "Who is this?" An accompanying disciple took a look, then cupped his hands and replied, reporting to Elder, "These two people seem to be from the Yaoyin clan." "Yaoyin clan?" Elder Hua's eyes were filled with unfriendliness as he suddenly sneered. "This is the meeting place of our Xianmen 10 sects. What Yaoyin clan? Do you think you're worthy of coming here?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly waved his sleeve, and a gust of strong wind surged forward. Lu Meinyang's expression changed slightly. She took a step back and waved her sleeves, creating a gust of strong wind to meet the incoming qi. She frowned and said, "Fellow Taoist, how can you attack a fellow Taoist?" A cold glint appeared in Elder Hua's eyes, and he shouted, "You're just a demon, and you're just a person. Do you think you're worthy of being called a fellow Taoist with me?" He let out a sound. The strong cloud above his head shook, and a golden ring with multicolored light curling around it flew out. The ring was about the thickness of a pinky finger, and there were 8 jade rings embedded on it. At this moment, it flew out, and the sound of collision was very clear. Lu Mainyang was afraid that Wei Zihong would be injured, so she did not dare to dodge. She shouted, and a white lotus flew out from the strong cloud above her head. It gave off waves of gentle spiritual light and protected the two of them within. The golden hoop landed and collided with the spiritual light. Instantly, there were many sparks of golden sparks that clanged and caused a huge commotion. At this moment, the elders and disciples of the various sects arrived at the peak. Those who recognized this talisman were all astonished. An elder from Li Mountain sect asked, 8 golden jade rings? Why is Elder Hua so angry? Who is that woman? Someone who knew replied in a low voice, this is Jinren Zhang's accompanying protector, and the other person beside him is his disciple. Everyone then came to a realization. Elder Hu from Pingdu sect died under Zhang Yan's sword, and the two sects even had discord because of this. Elder Hua was Elder Hu's senior and junior brother, and he probably heard the news of Zhang Yan's death, so he could not wait to find trouble with his disciple. Although these cultivators from Xianmen despised Elder Hua's actions, no one came out to stop him. To them, if Zhang Yan was still alive, they could go up and persuade him. They could still give him some face, but now, they did not want to offend Pingdu sect for the sake of a dead person. Elder Hua saw that Lu Mainyang had blocked his own talisman and was slightly surprised. He was thinking about whether he should summon the Dharma spirit, but suddenly there was a blur in front of him. A clear light fell between the two of them, and with a buzzing sound, his golden ring was shaken back. He could not help but be shocked, and when he looked again, he found that it was a green bamboo branch. Luo Qingyu walked out of the main hall, raised his hand, and kept the bamboo branch. Without looking at Elder Hua, he only said to Wei Zihong, Apprentice, nephew Wei, why are you here? Senior Hua wanted to talk to you. Wei Zihong's expression relaxed, and he walked up to Luo Qingyu, cupped his hands, and said, Thank you, Uncle Master Luo, for helping me out. Luo Qingyu patted his shoulder, and sighed, Speaking of which, when you returned to the sect with junior brother Zhang, I saw you once. He smiled again, Follow me. Having said that, he turned and walked into the main hall. Wei Zihong hurried to follow him into the main hall. Because Lu Mainyang was a demon cultivator, she could not enter the main hall and had to stay outside. Elder Hua's expression was very gloomy. He did not expect Luo Qingyu to interfere. However, Qinsong School was powerful, and he knew that he could not afford to offend them. He snorted, flicked his sleeves, and walked into the main hall, and sat down at his own table. Wei Zihong followed behind Luo Qingyu, and all the way to Huashuanwen's table. Under the gaze of many Yuanian cultivators, he did not have stage fright, and made a Dao salute, and said in a clear voice, Zihong greets Uncle Master Hua. Huashuanwen looked over, and saw that Zihong had extraordinary qualifications, and secretly sighed, You are junior brother Zhang's disciple, right? Junior brother Zhang's tragic death was not what we wanted. After the meeting, you should follow us back to Qinsong. Wei Zihong could not help but be shocked and said, My master is still cultivating in the star stone, how can he die? His words were extremely loud, causing the hall to fall into silence for a moment. Everyone's faces were filled with shock. Huashuanwen suddenly raised his head, and his eyes lit up and said, Martial nephew, you mean? Zhong Muqing, who was beside him, also reacted, and stared at Wei Zihong. Wei Zihong took out a jade box from his sleeve, and solemnly placed it on the table. Inya Daoren stood up excitedly and said, Could this be? Everyone immediately reacted, and their eyes focused on the jade box. Since Zhang Yan was not dead, then just now, the thing that fell from the star stone should be. Wei Zihong took a deep breath, and reached out to open the lid of the box. A cloud of smoke rolled out and hung in the air. He pointed with his finger and proudly said, Feng Haiyang has been killed by my master, and this head is proof. Inya Daoren suddenly stood up, and his eyes widened, staring at the head, and his beard trembled. After a while, he laughed loudly and said, It really is Feng Haiyang. In this sword battle, the celestial sect of wonders has won. At this moment, the hearts of the celestial sect of wonders feathered warriors were all stirred up. Previously, when they heard that Zhang Yan stayed behind to fight Feng Haiyang, they actually did not think that he would win. Later, when the talisman fell on Yaoyin Peak, they did not think too much about it. However, they did not expect that he could really kill Feng Haiyang, a third-tier Yuaning cultivator, and even send his head out. Elder Hua's expression became extremely ugly. He originally thought that Zhang Yan was already dead, which was why he unscrupulously humiliated Lu Mainyang and Wei Zihong. With Zhang Yan's temperament, this matter would definitely not end just like that. Today, this hatred was finally formed. Ingya Daoren turned around, faced the crowd, and said loudly, "Everyone, spiritual master Zhang killed Feng Haiyang. This matter should be spread to the celestial sect of wonders, and the hearts of the people of the world will be lifted." Huoxian nodded, and said in a deep voice, "Yaoyin clan Zhang Yan, spiritual master Zhang, defeated the demon Feng Haiyang, and is the #1 sword battle among the Donghua sects." Ingya Daoren's smile froze, and he came back and cupped his hands. Spiritual Master Zhang is a disciple of the Qinsong school. If the Yaoyin clan wins, doesn't that mean that your sect wins? Fellow Ingya. Huoxian didn't wait for him to finish and suddenly interrupted him, saying expressionlessly, "Spiritual Master Zhang is the Grand Supreme Elder of the Yaoyin clan. Don't get it mixed up." Ingya Daoren wanted to say something, but he felt his arm tighten. He turned around and found that Elder Lu had grabbed him, and the latter shook his head at him. Although Ingya Daoren was unwilling, he had no choice but to keep his thoughts to himself. He forced a smile and said, "Spiritual Master Hua is right." Inside the Star Stone, Zhang Yan was riding a beam of light to the north. When he reached the precipice at the end, he turned around for a while and found a cliff to land on. He looked around and said, "This place is not bad." With a shout, he rode a beam of sword light and cut out a flat boundary. He waved his sleeves and sat cross-legged on the cliff. Then, he took out a set of formation flags from his sleeve and chanted the incantation. The flags turned into a beam of light and landed 10 feet away. Then, he sat on a chair, and a bright light suddenly shone, forming a forbidden formation. Although he had eliminated all the enemies here, the Devil's Doctrine's tricks were strange and unpredictable. Who knew if there were any hidden tricks left behind? While he was cultivating, he would definitely be careless, so he needed to keep a hand in hand just in case. When he felt that there was nothing wrong, he took out a ball of Jun Yang's Qi essence. He used his spiritual vigor slightly, and the Qi floated up from his palm, from his abdomen to his chest, from his chest to his forehead, and finally to the top of his head. Then, it slowly merged into the high cloud. He focused his mind, closed his eyes, and entered a meditative state. Chapter 611. Spring and autumn came and went, and the sun and moon rotated. In the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. Zhang Yan's aura shook, and he woke up from his meditative state. His eyelids opened slowly, and in an instant, a bright rainbow flashed in his eyes. After 3 years of wholeheartedly cultivating, his appearance had recovered to its original state, and was no longer like when he first formed the contract with the spirit. Not only that, now that his cultivation had advanced greatly, the strong cloud above his head had already transformed from 1 into 2, and by his side, there was another ball of faint illusory cloud that was condensed like smoke, drifting indeterminately. Obviously, with just a bit more time, he would be able to step into the second level of the nascent soul realm. This place was comparable to the Donghua Spirit Cave, and 1 year of cultivation was equivalent to 10 years of cultivation. With the help of the Qian Tian Jun Yang's Qi essence, the effect was even more extraordinary. If he was in the outside world, he would probably need 70 to 80 years to cultivate to this level. In fact, if he was just an ordinary Yuanian cultivator, he would have broken through the barrier by now if he cultivated without any distractions. However, his Dan was of the first grade, and his mana was deep and vigorous, like a bottomless pit. When he cultivated, it would take him more time than his peers. Zhang Yan looked at the flying peaks floating in the star stone, and thought, With Jun Yang's Qi essence in hand, when I return to the sect, even without the help of the spirit cave, my cultivation speed will not be much slower. As he was thinking, he suddenly heard the sound of metal and stone cracking. His spirit was lifted, and he knew that the time to leave was coming. Before the star stone returned to the outside of the 9 heavens, it would send away all the cultivators who came to take Jun Yang's Qi essence, so there was no need for the talisman to protect it. He knew the changes, so he did not panic and sat still. He focused and waited for the time to come. After a moment, the wind suddenly blew, and countless spiritual vigor surged from all directions. A strong force wrapped around him, and after a few breaths, a bright golden light rushed down from the sky and covered him. Then, it rose into the sky and turned into a bright flowing light. In a moment of carelessness, he was sent out of the star stone. With a loud bang, he broke through the strong wind and fell down. At this moment, in Chengyuan Gorge, the disciples of various sects had already left. Only Wei Zihong, Zhang, Lu, and Dragon Carp Luren were still waiting here. A golden light shone down from the sky. Wei Zihong's eyes shone with joy. He said excitedly, "Master has returned." As soon as he finished speaking, the golden light shot down like a shooting star. Before he could even get close, he could already feel a strong gust of wind approaching him, piercing his cheeks painfully. At this moment, a green-clothed girl suddenly appeared and grabbed his wrist. She said anxiously, "Master, quickly hide. That's the astral wind from the second heavenly layer of heaven. Even a Yuanian cultivator can't withstand it." Wei Zihong's expression tightened, and he hurriedly retreated. He'd only moved a few meters away when he heard a rumbling sound by his ears, and the brilliant light fiercely collided with the top of the mountain. The force of the collision was so ferocious that even the entire mountain trembled, and if it wasn't for the protection of the restrictions, perhaps even the altar would have been shattered. He widened his eyes and looked over, only to see a young Taoist standing there with his hands behind his back. He couldn't help but feel excited and shook off the young girl's hand. He took a few steps forward and knelt down on the ground with a thud, kowtowing and saying, "Disciple Wei Zihong respectfully welcomes Master's return." "Disciple, get up." Wei Zihong felt his arm tighten, and he raised his head in shock, only to see Zhang Yan walking over to help him up. His heart unconsciously became even more excited, but with a little fear, he said in a trembling voice, "Benevolent Master, how can this disciple be worthy?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You are worthy." At this time, Zhang Boyan and Lu Meinyang also came up to greet him. They said, "Greetings, Chief. Congratulations on your great progress in cultivation." Zhang Yan also returned the greeting. After chatting for a while, he turned around and asked, "Disciple, during the time I wasn't around, did anyone come looking for trouble?" Wei Zihong hesitated for a while and answered, "In these 3 years, with Senior C's protection and the protection of the prohibition here, nothing serious happened. It's just that he didn't dare to hide anything and told him about being bullied by Pingdu Sec's Elder Hua." Zhang Yan's expression didn't change, but his eyes were slightly cold. He nodded and said, "I understand." Wei Zihong hesitated for a while, then suddenly bent his knees and knelt again. He said, "Master, can you keep Elder Hua? When I'm successful in my cultivation, I'll personally look for him to resolve the karma." Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. Then he looked at him meaningfully and said, "You're really strong-willed. All right, I'll allow you. However, this still involves fellow Taoist Lu's reputation. If it doesn't work out in the future, you'll have to give her an explanation." Lu Meinyang hurriedly said, "It's just a small matter." However, Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, "Fellow Taoist Lu, you don't have to be so courteous with my disciple. In the future, your opportunity might still fall on him." Lu Meinyang was enlightened by his words and seemed to have understood something. She nodded and said, "Yes." She bowed and stepped aside. Wei Zihong said loudly, "Thank you, Master." He respectfully kowtowed once before standing up. At this time, the young girl who was formed by the formation spirit walked up again and whispered a few words in his ear. He nodded unconsciously. He reached into his sleeve and took out a wooden box. He held it with both hands and presented it to Zhang Yan. He said, "Master, before the elders and disciples of Xianmen left, they had left many letters and asked me to pass them to Master to read." Zhang Yan casually took the letter and opened it. The letter was mostly filled with pleasantries. It was nothing more than a way to get acquainted with him. After reading a few more letters, they were all the same. There was nothing special about them. He didn't have the mood to read any more and was about to put it away. However, he seemed to have thought of something and his movements paused. His eyes moved a few times before he shook his sleeve and put all the letters into his sleeve. At this time, a clear and melodious whistle suddenly came from the sky. He turned his head to look and saw a brilliant golden rainbow coming from afar. It flew along the river in the gorge and arrived at the foot of the mountain in the blink of an eye. However, because of the restrictive formation, it couldn't come up. Zhang Yan said in surprise, "Howling Lake Golden Sword?" This sword was usually used to send messages in Longyuan Lake. Here, it was clearly telling others that this was a flying sword messenger from Qinsong School. He pondered for a moment, then reached out his hand to grab the golden sword. He pulled out the sword hilt and took out the letter inside. After reading it, he couldn't help but sneer and said, "As expected, an ordinary man is innocent, but treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime. Knowing that my Junyang's essence is in my hands, some people are not too willing to accept it. I'm afraid the journey back will not be peaceful." The name of the person who wrote the letter was Miao Kuan. This person was a registered disciple of sect leader Qin. He didn't have a deep relationship with him. Now that there was a letter, it was enough to determine that this letter was just a cover-up. The real person behind the letter should be the sect leader. Therefore, the contents of the letter was very credible. When Wei Zihong heard this, he was shocked and said in fear, "Master, it was your disciple who acted on his own and announced that I killed Feng Haiyang. But did I do anything wrong?" Zhang Yan shook his head and said with a smile, "What did I do wrong? If I was sincere in hiding it, how would you know?" 3 years ago, he deliberately released the news. He had thought in advance that if Feng Haiyang and himself were dead or alive, he wouldn't have sent the letter. The experts of the 6 great devil sects would definitely gather outside Chengyuan Gorge so that they could receive Feng Haiyang. In that kind of chaotic situation, if he took the star stone from Junyang's essence, then on his way back to Qinsong School, he would definitely be stopped by many cultivators of the devil sects. There might even be people who were difficult to deal with. But now, it was different. Since they clearly knew that Junyang's essence was in his hands, then no matter what, the sects of the Xianmen had to protect him to prevent the item from being taken away by the devil sects. Even if there was an incident, it would be between the sects of the Xianmen, so there would be no danger to his life. And this letter from the sect master was to tell him that on his way back to the sect, there would be 3 people he couldn't fight against who would stop him. He had to be careful. Zhang Yan pondered for a while, then smiled and sat cross-legged on the altar. Seeing him like this, Wei Zihong was startled and said, "Master, aren't you going back to the cave?" Zhang Yan said, "There's no need to rush. I have my reasons." Wei Zihong didn't dare to say more. He bowed and retreated to the side. Zhang Yan turned to Lu and Zhang, 2 people, and said, "The 2 of you may leave." Although Lu Mainyang and Zhang Boyan didn't understand what he meant, they didn't say anything. They also bowed and sat to the side. They adjusted their breathing and closed their eyes to meditate. About 2 hours later, a loud laugh suddenly came from the sky. "Daoist Zhang, can you allow Daoren to say a few words?" Zhang Yan looked up and saw an elegant, tall, and thin Daoren standing in the air. His face was red, and his white beard fluttered in the wind. He looked like an immortal. Zhang Yan carefully looked at him, but couldn't see any details about this person. He stood up and cupped his hands, then said, "Senior, please speak. Junior is listening." The Taoist said, "Daoist Zhang, let me ask you. Are you taking this Junyang's essence for the Qinsong School or for the Yaoyin clan?" Zhang Yan answered without hesitation, "I came to attend the meeting in the name of Yaoyin. Naturally, it's for the sake of the Yaoyin clan." "Good." That Daoren nodded and said, "Do you know that there will be many obstacles on the way back? How many people will covet the things in your hands?" And since you're not fighting for the essence for the Qinsong school, I'm afraid no one will come to save you. Zhang Yan's mind was clear. Sect leader Qin's letter was to tell him that the Qinsong school couldn't come forward to protect him. If his life was in danger, then the Qinsong school would be justified in making a move. But if those people were only here for the essence and didn't want to hurt him, then it wouldn't be good for them to make a move. Otherwise, the statement that Yaoyin and the Qinsong school had nothing to do with each other would be untenable. Behind this, however, was the continuation of the struggle for the essence. The current situation was a secret game between the Taoist sects and the Qinsong school. And he was in the middle of the whirlpool. How he would deal with it depended on himself. Seeing that he didn't say anything, that Daoren said again, "Taoist Daoren, I wonder if you want to hear about it?" Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "Senior, please speak clearly." Daoren said, "Remember, if you're in danger, you only need to call out, Huang Yugong. I'll definitely come and help you out. I can guarantee that you'll be able to return to the sect safely." After this person finished speaking, he laughed out loud and suddenly turned into a stream of light. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared without a trace. Chapter 6:12. Just now, the conversation between Zhang Yan and Daoren was heard by everyone below, and they all revealed tense expressions. Zhang Boyan looked in the direction where Daoren had left and sneered, "Huang Yugong? I've never heard of this person's name before. I think he should be a senior expert from the 10 sections. If the manor head were to ask for help later, he would inevitably owe a favor and karma. His calculations are very good." Dragon Carprueren was originally lying under the river, but now he raised his head and poked his head out of the water, saying, "Master, what are you afraid of? Below Qingyuan Gorge is Qing River, and this water leads straight to the East Sea. Master also knows that this lowly one is good with water, so I can escort Master safely all the way out." Zhang Yan thought for a while and rejected the suggestion. He waved his hand and said, "The people who came to stop me must know your background. So how could they not be on guard in advance? If I really do this, I will most likely fall into their trap." Wei Zihong suddenly had an idea, and he stepped forward and cupped his hands, saying, "Master, disciple has a plan here." Zhang Yan showed some interest. "Disciple, tell me." Wei Zihong straightened his body and said with assurance, "Master, why are you in a hurry to leave now? This mountain is protected by a restrictive formation, so we don't have to be afraid of enemies attacking. If we cultivate here for a year and a half, do you think those people will still be waiting there?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "This idea of yours isn't bad under normal circumstances, but the situation is different this time, so it can't be used here." Wei Zihong was startled, and he asked in confusion, "Why?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There has always been a saying that one can only be a thief for 1,000 days, so how can one guard against a thief for 1,000 days? This matter can only be settled as soon as possible to avoid endless troubles in the future." The Junyang essence in his high cloud still needed dozens of years to be completely refined. Logically speaking, it was fine to cultivate here. As long as he kept delaying, these 3 people would eventually be unable to outlast him. But things weren't so simple. Junyang's essence qi was involved in the conflict of interests among the sects, and it couldn't be avoided with some tricks. Right now, at least sect leader Qin was watching from the back. The experts of the various sects were also gathered here. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, the person blocking the way would not be too shameless. As long as this matter was resolved in a fair and just manner, these people would no longer have an excuse to cause trouble for him in the future. Wei Zihong didn't really understand, but he also knew that his method wasn't appropriate. He couldn't help but worry, "Then what should we do?" Zhang Yan said comfortingly, "The people blocking the road ahead are not things that can be won with numbers, but I have a way to deal with them. You don't need to worry too much." He flicked his sleeves. He stood up. He then said to Lu, Zhang, and Dragon Carp Liao Ren, "I'm leaving now. After I leave, I'll have to trouble the 3 of you to send my disciple back to the cave abode." Lu Mainyang said worriedly, "Manor Lord, those people attack sect leader Wei." From the words just now, she could tell that the person blocking the way had a very high cultivation level. If they could capture Wei Zihong and force Zhang Yan to give in, they probably wouldn't be able to protect him. Zhang Yan didn't care and said, "It's okay. Just follow me. You'll be fine." The person who was blocking the road in front of them didn't even bother to look for him, the main culprit. Instead, they made things difficult for a junior in front of a fellow Taoist. That was shameless. Not only did they not gain anything by doing so, but it would also give the Dark Azure sect an excuse to intervene. Perhaps a few people would really have such thoughts, but the sect behind them wouldn't be so unwise. Besides, he had Dragon Carp to protect him, so he didn't need to worry about those with low cultivation level. After giving a few more instructions, Zhang Yanqing shouted and leaped up on a sword light. He did not go to the Empyrean pole heaven by borrowing the astral wind. Instead, he went east along the Qing River. Although it was a little slow, if there were any accidents, he could escape by using the water at any time. After traveling for half an hour, he suddenly felt something. He looked up and saw a faint white smoke falling from the blue sky. After landing on the river in front of him, it spread out and a person came out. He was holding a white jade ruler, wearing a red robe and a golden crown. He looked elegant and had a beautiful beard in front of his chest. He looked to be in his 40s, but his feet seemed real and illusory, as if they were covered by a cloud of mist. He said loudly, "Are you fellow Taoist Zhang?" Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. He could tell that this person was only an avatar that had come here. He stopped the conveyance light and stood on the cloud. He calmly bowed and said, "Yes, I am. May I know who you are?" The middle-aged Taoist avoided mentioning his name and only said, "I would like to invite you to stay in my cave for a few days. Are you willing?" Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled. He replied politely, "I'm in a hurry to return to the sect. I'm afraid I can't stay for long. I'll have to disappoint you." The middle-aged Taoist said it was a pity and said, "I'm sure you know why I'm here. However, this seems to be bullying the weak. How about this? I'll only attack once. No matter what you do to block it, if you can withstand it, you can leave." Zhang Yan put his hands together and said solemnly, "Please enlighten me, senior." The middle-aged Taoist only waved his sleeve lightly. In an instant, the white fog on the river seemed to be blown away by a hurricane and surged over. Zhang Yan felt a huge force pressing down on his body from all directions. He immediately realized that although this attack was a pure attack of mana, the opponent's cultivation was too high. He could not block it head-on. Therefore, he did not hesitate to use his technique. A clear light appeared and a huge cloud tower appeared on the water. He leaped and turned into a conveyance light that flew inside and hid inside. The cloud rushed over and crashed into the tower. The towering cloud tower shook violently and gave off a series of explosions. However, it did not break. The middle-aged Taoist shook his head and retracted his hand. He turned around and flung his sleeve, saying, "Do as you wish, Taoist." Zhang Yan raised his hand and cupped his fist again. He summoned a beam of light and flew into the sky. He held the Cloud Watchtower talisman and used his mana to explore it. He found that with just one blow, half of the restrictions on it had been broken. If he were to encounter such a powerful enemy again, he might only be able to block it for a while. After flying for another hour, a black cloud that was like a mountain appeared in the sky. It pressed heavily in the air and blocked his way. Zhang Yan's expression did not change. He continued to fly forward. When he reached the bottom of the black cloud, he heard a clear cry. Suddenly, a bird's claw stretched out from within. It was thousands of feet long and its claws were wide open. It grabbed towards him as if it could cover the sky. This time, the person who attacked did not even greet him and attacked immediately. Zhang Yan's expression froze. He originally wanted to use the water to escape, but he had a feeling that if he really did that, no matter where he ran, the claw would definitely be able to capture him. At this critical moment, his eyes flashed a few times. He shook the talisman in his hand, and the clear light shone brightly. He still used the lofty cloud tower to protect himself. The sharp claw came up, and with a rumble, the entire lofty cloud tower creaked as if it was about to collapse. After the person in the cloud exerted his strength to grind for a while, he saw that he could not take him down. He retracted his divine power and the black cloud that was floating in the sky disappeared without a trace in an instant. When Zhang Yan retracted the cloud tower and came out, the clouds in the sky had already dispersed. The blue sky was clear and there was no trace of turbidity. He checked the cloud tower talisman and found that more than 90% of the restrictions inside had collapsed. Obviously, it could not be used anymore. He could not help but ponder. Judging from the two people before, although they were only clones that came here, the strength of their Fa had already reached an unimaginable level. If it was any other Yuanian cultivator, it would be difficult to match them. Thus, the best thing to do was to avoid them. He thought again and was not in a hurry to continue on his journey. Instead, he found a mountain top and sat down cross-legged. He circulated his qi and adjusted his breathing. After about an hour, he stood up again and looked at the vast world in front of him. He let out a shout and flew towards the north. At this moment, there was an extremely large red-eyed feathered crane in the sky. On its back sat a white-haired, white-browed, and cloaked Daorin. The middle-aged Taoist who attacked Zhang Yan before was also at the side. He turned around and said meaningfully, "I didn't expect Taoist Xen to be merciful." Xen Daorin said expressionlessly, "I'm only a shadow clone here. How can I break the lofty cloud tower? If I forcefully attack, I'm afraid even my clone will disperse. On the other hand, if Taoist Wu could put in a little more effort, I might have a chance of winning." The middle-aged Taoist chuckled and said, "This Zhang Yan has such talent. He has a high chance of becoming one of us in the future. If we can kill him now, it will save us a lot of trouble. However, we can't take his life now. It's not worth it to create hatred for a mere wisp of essence. Today, I'll treat it as doing him a favor." Xen Daorin didn't comment. He only said, "The one in front has a higher cultivation than the two of us. He doesn't have to worry so much. This Zhang Yan might not be able to dodge without the lofty cloud tower." The middle-aged Taoist narrowed his eyes and said, "That will depend on his own fortune." After Zhang Yan left Qingjiang, he walked all the way north. Not long after, the lofty shadow of the Zhaoyu mountain at the end of the horizon became clearer and clearer. With his speed, he was actually not far from the mountain gate. At most, in another half an hour, he would be able to return to the mountain gate. If he flew at full speed, the time would be reduced by half. However, the closer it was to this time, the more he didn't dare to relax. After walking for a few more miles, a brilliant cloud suddenly appeared in front of him. Multicolored light flew around, as if there were countless stars dancing in the sky, blocking his path. On the cloud stood a woman dressed in men's clothing. Her waist was slender, and she was tall. Her hair was simply tied into a bun. Her nose was straight, and her skin was fair. Her lips were extremely thin. Although her appearance was also extremely beautiful, her eyes contained a trace of coldness. Zhang Yan focused his gaze and looked carefully. He noticed that the shadow under her feet was like smoke. It was also a clone. However, he was even more guarded in his heart. He thought to himself, "Previously, those two attacked repeatedly, but they only broke my protective instrument. After that, they didn't do anything else." According to what Huang Yugong said, it won't be easy to return to the mountain. I think this person is the real person I have to deal with. I need to be careful. Chapter 613. P.S. This chapter was added yesterday. There is one more chapter tonight. At this time, Zhang Yan was still more than 10 miles away from the woman, but with a slight sense, he could faintly feel that his surroundings seemed to be enveloped by an invisible mana. This technique was somewhat similar to the heaven and earth sealing technique, but when it was activated, it was even more difficult to detect. It was obviously a remarkable technique of Taoist Dongtian. Once the difference in cultivation between the two was too great, any tricks would be futile. Even if the other party was only a shadow clone, it was not something he could face head-on. If he wanted to escape, ordinary methods would not work. Thoughts spun in Zhang Yan's mind, yet his figure didn't stop as he moved forward on the gale, and it wasn't long before he'd arrived before the young woman. Under her piercingly cold gaze that was like a blade, his expression was still composed, and there wasn't the slightest trace of fear on his face. The woman stood with her hands behind her back, stared at him for a while, and said, "You are Zhang Yan? You really have some courage. No wonder Qingyun died in your hands. But since her skills are not as good as yours, I will not cause trouble for you. Today, leave Jun Yang's essence behind, and I will let you go. If not, I will capture you and bring you back to my sect. I am not afraid that you will not submit." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. Even though the two of them had come for Jun Yang's vital essence, they had always concealed their actions and hadn't shed all pretense of cordiality. However, this woman had announced it without any scruples, so it was clear that she was determined to obtain it. He cupped his hands and said in a deep voice, "May I know how to address you, senior?" The woman said coldly, "Even if I say my name, you will not know. There is no need to say more. I will give you half an incense stick of time. Think about it carefully." At this point, as if she wanted to remind him, she added, "Although this is in front of the Qinsong school, don't expect anyone to come and save you." Hearing this, Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and said in a clear voice, "No need. Since we are going to make a move, why wait? Let's end this quickly." The woman did not expect Zhang Yan's answer to be so decisive, and her expression slightly stiffened. Then, a sullen expression appeared on his face. Annoyed, he said, "You don't know what's good for you. You asked for it." She rolled up her sleeves and raised her hand, revealing half of her jade-like arm. Then she pointed forward. In an instant, thousands of flying stars rose up. Like a firefly in the night, they transformed into numerous flowing lights that flickered indeterminately and streaked through the sky from all directions. Although Zhang Yan's lofty cloud tower was unable to block this person, other than that, however, he still had a few defensive treasures. He pinched the golden earth axis talisman that he had hidden in his sleeve, and a golden light immediately emerged, firmly surrounding his body. At the same time, a purple light emerged from between his eyebrows, flickering incessantly, as if it could fly out at any time. This first step was the most important of all the countermeasures he had come up with. Only by blocking the opponent's attack could he talk about the rest. However, he had no way of knowing what kind of mysterious means the Taoist heavenly abode had, so he couldn't make an accurate judgment. Therefore, he could only prepare for the worst-case scenario. If the golden talisman couldn't block the attack, he could only use his final killing move. The scattered stars came over and instantly collided with the golden light of the talisman. For a moment, the golden light flickered chaotically and trembled incessantly. It seemed like it wouldn't be able to last for long. However, Zhang Yan's spirit was lifted. He had been waiting for this moment to catch his breath. Now that he had the chance, he shook his body and used the minor universe movement escape technique. Suddenly, he turned into a ray of light and fell to the ground. When he reached the surface, he quickly entered and disappeared. The woman obviously didn't expect him to have such an ability. She was stunned for a moment, then she sneered and said, "This is the best escape technique. Within a radius of 50 miles, everything is locked by my magic power. Let's see where you can run to." She stretched out her hand and pressed down. The cloud beside her sunk down, and thousands of starlights spilled out at the same time. The surface of the ground trembled and rumbled. In the blink of an eye, dozens of pits that were hundreds of feet deep were created, and they were still continuing to go down. At this time, in the clouds, the middle-aged cultivator and Xen Daoren were watching the battle. The middle-aged cultivator said playfully, "This fellow Taoist Zhou has such a big temper. He's so unscrupulous. Isn't he afraid of offending Qinsong school?" Xen Daoren said expressionlessly, "After all, Zhou Ruing just formed his heavenly abode not long ago. He's full of himself. Think about it, didn't we also act so arrogantly at that time?" The middle-aged cultivator nodded and said, "If Yuxiao school takes the essence, it's not a bad thing. With the previous agreement of the 10 sects, there's no need to worry about it. But today, Lady Zhou offended this fellow Taoist Zhang. In the future, she'll have a great enemy for no reason." Xen Daoren said indifferently, One of Zhou's disciples died in the hands of Zhang Yan. If you want to talk about hatred, it's already formed. Moreover, Yuxiao is a great sect that has existed for tens of thousands of years. Why would they care about such things? The middle-aged cultivator snorted and said, "When the three great calamities arrive, if our luck is bad, even we may not be able to escape. It's better to be careful." Zhang Yan borrowed the earth escape technique and went deep underground. His original intention was to widen the distance between them. As long as he got rid of the restriction of the opponent's magic power, it would be much easier to get to him. However, after going a few thousand feet deep, he felt that the magic power was firmly wrapped around his body and didn't weaken at all. He thought to himself, the Heavenly Abodes technique is really unimaginable. This magic power trapping technique is round and round. It's actually not limited by the landscape. It seems like this method won't work. His 5 elements escape technique was also a magical technique. The deeper he went, the more magic power he needed. If he insisted on being strong, his magic power would be exhausted before he could escape. Therefore, after going a few thousand feet, he didn't persist. He turned around and escaped. In an instant, he was more than 10 miles away. Even so, he still didn't feel safe. He made several hand signs, and after 3 breaths, he was more than 40 miles away. At this time, he wanted to move forward again, but he felt like there was a barrier in front of him. He couldn't go out. He had already expected this. Fortunately, there was some distance between him and the woman. In the time it took for her to catch up, it was enough for him to use his technique. He pulled his body up to the surface of the earth and made a hand sign. A stream of clear air emerged from his back and 72, 10,000 beasts sleeping moonstreamers flew out from it. With a slight shake, they shot out like lightning in different directions. When the 6 recursions coffin formation was set up in a row, the area of dozens of miles immediately fell into a gloomy fog. The demonic flames burned brightly and the screams shook the sky. Zhang Yan went up to the altar and saw that Lu Changsu did not wait for his instructions before urgently activating the formation. It was obvious that Lu Changsu had also sensed the strength of this enemy. He nodded slightly and did not say anything else. He stretched out his hand and pointed. The mountain and river diagram flew out from his sleeve and immediately suppressed the main seat. If this formation could delay this person for a while, he would be able to return safely. Zhou Ruing was chasing in Zhang Yan's direction based on what she sensed just now. At this time, she suddenly saw the change in the surrounding wind and clouds. She just casually glanced at it and the escape light didn't even stop for a moment and continued to fly forward. Obviously, she didn't care in the slightest. It wasn't that she was careless, but she was confident in her strength. As long as it wasn't the mountain gate formation, she didn't need to care about what it was and just needed to force her way through. When faced with such a formidable enemy, Lu Changsu, who stood on the altar, was terrified, and he desperately waved the formation flag, causing the formation chi to instantly transform into countless raging flames, metal winds, rocks that rained down. However, before they could even land on Zhou Ruing, they were dispersed by the layer of starlight that dispersed around her body. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He had already expected that this formation wouldn't be able to trap this person for long, but he didn't expect that he still underestimated her. Even if he used the mountain-river diagram to suppress the formation, it wouldn't be able to delay her for even half a minute. If this continued, it would be difficult for him to continue his plan to escape. He pondered for a while, reached into his sleeve, took out a ball of Jun Yang's essence, and threw it into the mountain-river diagram without hesitation. As soon as the essence entered, the painting suddenly emitted rays of light as if it was bathed in colorful rainbows. At this time, a spiritual light flashed, and Mountain River Child came out. He bowed and said, "Thank you for the treasure, Master." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This essence was originally going to be used on you, but now that a great enemy is in front of us, it's not convenient for me to say more. Let me ask you, how long can you delay this person?" Mountain River Child thought for a while and said, "Although I have the help of Jun Yang's essence, I can only refine a little in a hurry. At most, I can only delay this person for about half an hour." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "That's enough." He didn't hesitate anymore, reached into his sleeve, and took out the talisman of the great lofty cloud tower. This talisman was divided into inner and outer restriction. Just now, although more than 90% of the outer restriction was broken, as long as the inner restriction was not damaged, he could still go back and refine it to restore it. However, he wasn't using it to defend at this moment. Instead, he wanted to borrow its power to force his way out of this world. With a tap of his feet, he flew into the hall. After sitting down, he shook the talisman and activated the great lofty cloud tower, and it slowly flew out. Although the flying speed of this thing was a little slow, this place wasn't far from the mountain gate. As long as he went outside, he could use the escape technique and quickly return to the mountain gate. Not long after, he heard a rumbling sound in his ears, and his spirit was lifted. He raised his head and saw the blue sky and white clouds leisurely. He knew that he had broken through the layer of magic power net, so he shook the talisman and put the great lofty cloud tower back. Then, he threw himself into the ground, and his body suddenly disappeared. He had already used the escape technique of the earth to move. Although this divine art consumed magic power, as long as he could enter the boundary of the Qinsong school in time, no matter how powerful the opponent was, they couldn't do anything to him. After walking for 100 breaths, he saw that there was still 1 or 2 miles left before he could enter the forbidden formation of the clear nether heavenly lake. At this moment, there was a sudden explosion behind him, and a starlight shot into the sky like a waterfall, quickly chasing after him. Zhang Yan leaped out from the ground and glanced back. He faintly smiled, and with a single step, he suddenly teleported 3 kilometers away and stepped into the restrictive formation. Zhou Ruiying was furious. She didn't expect a mere Yuanying cultivator to be able to escape from her hands. She shouted and used some kind of Dao technique, and in the blink of an eye, she actually caught up. However, the moment she stepped into the forbidden formation, her face suddenly revealed shock and anger. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning came from the sky, and with a flash, she was smashed into pieces with a crack. Inside the Changguan heavenly cave, Sun Jinren was wearing a golden robe and a crown, and he sat on a jade platform. He looked at a water mirror and said coldly, "You lost in front of a junior, and you still chased after me. So shameless. Do you really think my Qinsong school is easy to bully?" Chapter 614. Zhou Ruiying's clone was instantly destroyed. The expressions of the middle-aged cultivator who was watching the battle and Daoren changed, and they retreated to the distance at the same time. The doppelganger transformation was the result of Taoist heavenly abode's efforts, and it was condensed with magic power. If it was destroyed, although it wouldn't cause much damage to him, it would still take dozens of years for him to cultivate and reform. They didn't want to be the fish in the pond. The two of them looked at each other. Since the outcome was decided, they didn't want to stay here any longer. Their bodies flashed, and they turned into streams of light and flew away. After the two of them left, Huang Yugong slowly appeared in the sky. He looked a little disappointed, and after looking at the heavenly lake of Zhaoyu a few times, he shook his head, stomped his feet, and also turned into a beam of light and flew away. At first, when Zhang Yan saw Zhou Ruiying charging over aggressively, he was prepared to use the restriction formation to avoid her. But suddenly, he saw a bolt of lightning strike him, and he turned into countless objects that seemed to be light, but not light, and like a cloud, but not a cloud, and scattered in all directions. It looked like they had some spiritual consciousness, and they seemed to want to escape, but this place was already where the restriction of the clear nether heavenly lake was, so they could only crash around aimlessly. At this time, a voice suddenly sounded in his ear. "This is Taoist Xiangxiang's qi and blood. Take it, there will be benefits for you." Zhang Yan's expression changed. Only then did he know that the bolt of lightning just now was Sun Jinren's doing. He cupped his hands in the air and said, "Thank you, Sun Jinren, for helping me." Sun Jinren's voice sounded again. "I just can't stand that Zhou Ruiying's arrogant behavior. But you need to be careful in the future, she will put this on your head." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "I also have a debt in my heart." Sun Jinren laughed and said, "That's right. We, the disciples of Qinsong, should have this kind of heroic spirit. In the future, if you have any difficulties in your cultivation, you can come to the Changguan cave and ask me. Zhang Yan cupped his fists in salute. A moment later, not even the slightest sound was heard. Knowing that Sun Jinren had left, he turned around and shone his water element true light on the pure qi and blood heroic essence, absorbing it all into his body. Then, he flicked his sleeves and stepped out of the forbidden array. Not long after, returning to the place where he had set up the formation just now, with a wave of his hand, the 72 10,000 beasts sleeping moon streamers and the mountain and river diagram all turned into streams of light and flew into his sleeve. He sensed it with his mind. He sensed that Dragon Carp Renren was still thousands of miles away. It wasn't something that could be done in a short time. Without waiting any longer, he waved his sleeves and a gust of astral wind blew. Supporting his body, he returned to the Zhao Yu cave manor. However, just now, when he was halfway there, he suddenly saw a Taoist boy riding on a crane and shouting in the sky. Zhao Yu Cave Manor head Zhang Yan, Sect Master Reverend, has a decree ordering you to go to the floating heavenly palace later. Zhang Yan hurriedly steadied his body and bowed. Disciple understands. The boy held up an item in his hand and said, "This is an entry talisman. Manor head Zhang, keep it well, don't let Sect Master wait for too long." He threw the talisman down, then lightly patted the neck of the celestial crane he was riding on. With a clear cry, the celestial bird flapped its wings and rose into the clouds, turning into a black dot in the blink of an eye. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand and received the talisman. He thought for a while and felt that there was no rush to return to the manor. Sect Master seemed to have something important to do, so he should go and visit him first. Thinking up to this point, he patted the talisman. Immediately, a gentle light flashed from it and wrapped around his body. Then, it turned into a golden rainbow in the sky and shot into the sky. The talisman flew very fast. In just half an incense's time, it rushed into the mountain gate of Qinsong School. After flying for a while above the great lake of Dragon Abyss, the light turned again and flew thousands of feet up in the sky, arriving in front of the floating heavenly palace in an instant. After 3 years, Zhang Yan had a different feeling when he came here again. He looked around and glanced at the 3 main halls one by one. When he passed by the hall of Du Zhen, he took another look. At this moment, he suddenly felt his body become heavy and relaxed. The light in front of him dispersed, and he had already landed in front of the side hall he came from. As soon as he stood still, he saw the servant boy on duty taking the initiative to greet him from afar. The servant boy cupped his fist and respectfully said, "Manor head Zhang, the headmaster has said that if you come, there is no need to report to him. You can just enter the hall and see him." Zhang Yan nodded to show that he understood. He tidied up his sleeves and walked into the hall. Not long after, he arrived at the inner hall. He raised his head slightly and saw the sect master sitting on the star platform with a horsetail whisk in his hand. He didn't dare to be rude and walked up to him. He bowed and said, "Disciple Zhang Yan pays respect to Sect Master Reverend." Sect Master Qin looked at him for a while and nodded. He said, "Zhang Yan, you did very well in this sword battle." Zhang Yan bowed slightly and cupped his fists. He said, "I don't deserve Sect Master's praise. I just got a little bit of luck." Sect Master Qin's eyes were filled with praise. He said, "Other than Hu Xian and Qin Yu who got Jun Yang's essence, is the rest of it in your hands?" Zhang Yan didn't hide it and answered frankly, "Yes, other than the Devil Sect's disciple who used it, all the disciples got the essence." At this point, Qin Mabai smiled and pressed his hand to stop him from continuing. He said, "Take out a portion of the essence." Zhang Yan didn't hesitate and did as he was told. He took out a jade bottle from his sleeve. Sect Master Qin waved his hand and took the jade bottle. He said, "This matter ends here. Don't mention it in front of me in the future. Do you understand?" Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. He bowed and said, "I understand." Looking at the sect master's attitude, it seemed that he didn't care much about the Jun Yang's essence. Even if he took a portion, it was only to calm him down. But since he had made so many plans and set up both paths in the open and in the dark, if it wasn't to get the essence, then what was it for? Just as he was pondering, Sect Master Qin said, "I summoned you here today because I have another matter to discuss with you." Zhang Yan cupped his fists and said, "Please tell me, Sect Master." At this moment, a servant boy walked in and reported, "Sect Master, Zhenrenshin has arrived and is waiting outside." Sect Master Qin waved the horsetail whisk in his hand and said, "Invite him in." Not long after, Shen Baishuang stepped into the hall. He came forward and bowed, saying, "Baishuang greets Sect Master Shixiang." Sect Master Qin chuckled and said, "Shixiang, you don't have to be so polite. Sit down and talk." Shen Baishuang cupped his fists again and sat at the side. Sect Master Qin's expression was kind. He said, "Shitty Shen, I was just talking about that matter with Zhang Yan. You came at the right time, so you can talk about it." Shen Baishuang straightened his body and said, "Shitty Shen, when I traveled to Dongsheng continent, I was ordered by the sect to build a branch for Qinsong school there. But this time, I returned to the sect. I was preparing to meditate and cultivate. When the time came for me to break through, I would not go out. But it would be inappropriate if no one took over that place. Now that we have discussed it, Sect Master Shixiang is interested in you. I also think that it is suitable. What do you think?" Sect Master Qin smiled and said, "Zhang Yan, if you are not willing, it is fine. That's fine. Just don't go out in the next 100 years. Just stay in the mansion and cultivate." Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. The sect master ordered him to take over Shen Baishuang's branch. There was a subtle meaning behind it. Shen Baishuang did not look like he was willing, so it must have been discussed beforehand. But when he thought about it carefully, he secretly praised it. The sect master's arrangement had a hidden intention of protecting him. Everyone knew that he had taken the essence of Jun Yang of the great continent. However, the tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. Although he was not afraid, if he went to another continent, not only could he temporarily hide from the wind, he could also cultivate in peace. Now that the devil's tribulation had started, if he went to the Dongsheng continent, even if someone from the devil's doctrine came looking for him, it would at most be 1 or 2 people. However, cultivating in the mansion was not necessarily safe. Not to mention the various sects, even the elders and disciples of the Qinsong school would most likely come looking for him after knowing that a lot of Jun Yang's essence was in his hands. It was better to go out and cultivate peacefully. After thinking for a while, he made up his mind and said loudly, "Since it is the arrangement of the sect master and martial uncle Shen, there is no reason to refuse. I am willing to go." When Shen Baishuang heard what he said, he seemed to be slightly relieved and said happily, "I have taken in a few registered disciples there, but they are not officially part of the sect yet. After you go, martial nephew, you can test them on my behalf. If there are any who do not live up to your expectations, you can punish them. There is no need to give me face." Zhang Yan did not stand on ceremony and said with a smile, "Since he is martial uncle's disciple, he is also my junior brother. Martial nephew will definitely discipline him on martial uncle's behalf." Sect Master Qin nodded and said, "After you go, the disciples of the Zhaoyu mansion will look after them for you. There is no need to worry. I will send people to teach them divine abilities and Dao techniques. There will not be any delay." Zhang Yan was overjoyed. Just this one matter was worth him going. He bowed and said, "On behalf of the sect, this disciple thanks the sect master." Sect Master Qin nodded slightly and said, "In at most 1 to 200 years, one of the 4 hidden devil's caves will appear. At that time, there will be a battle between our Xian Gate and the devil sects. I hope that your cultivation will improve by then, so that you can come back to the sect to help." Zhang Yan's mind changed. The 6 devil sects had lost the sword battle this time, so they would probably hide even deeper and wait for the opportunity to come before exerting their strength. After all, they had waited for thousands and tens of thousands of years. They would not be unable to endure a mere 1 to 200 years. It was just that by then, even if he did not have the cultivation of the 3rd level of Yuanying, he would have already entered the 2nd level. Sect Master Qin said again, "Previously, you won the sword battle. Although you went in the name of the Yaoyin clan, You also won a lot of face for our Qinsong school. Since I want to reward you, I will first bestow you a spell. He raised his hand and pointed. A golden talisman flew into Zhang Yan's forehead. When Shen Baishuang saw that, he smiled and said, "Since you want disciple nephew Zhang to help, as your uncle master, I can't let you do it for nothing." He also extended his hand and a red light entered Zhang Yan's sleeve. Sect Master Qin took a look and said in surprise, "Junior brother Shen, is that the Dharma treasure that Uncle Master Zhua gave you before you left?" Shen Baishuang nodded and said, "That's right. However, I no longer have any use for this item. Now that I've given it to disciple nephew Zhang, I can be considered to have made the best use of it." Zhang Yan bowed and said, "Thank you, Sect Master, Uncle Master Shen, for your gift." Sect Master Qin waved the horsetail whisk in his hand and said, "This matter must not be leaked. Go back to the residence and settle down first. After this matter is over, you can choose a day to set off. P.S. Friendly recommendation, Emperor Xiaoyong, wait for the Taoist priest in the clouds to show you the turbulent world of the 5 factions competing for supremacy." Chapter 6:15. Lu Yen wore a white robe, her hair tied up with a jade ring. She stood in front of the bright Serenity Cave with a graceful and fairy-like appearance. Because she knew that Zhang Yan was about to return, she led a group of people to wait at the top of the lake. Other than Tian Kuan, the Wang sisters, and Han Zhuqing, Wang Ziyuan and Yuan Yanhui were also among them. Behind them was a young man and woman, Lu Yenni's disciples, Zuohanzhang and Lin Xixue. Zuohanzhang moved closer to Lin Xixue and whispered, "Junior apprentice sister, do you know that Grandmaster won first place in the sword competition of the 18 sects?" Lin Xixue's eyes widened. Where did senior apprentice brother hear this? Although the result of the sword competition had been known to the world 3 years ago, they had been in seclusion in the sect for the past few years and had not heard of the outside world. It was only half a day ago that they heard that Grandmaster Zhang Yan was about to return. Just now, they had come out of seclusion. Zuohanzhang said proudly, "Senior apprentice brother, I just now received a letter from the Xie brothers." Lin Xixue exclaimed, "Senior apprentice brother, can you tell me in detail?" Qinsong School was divided into different manors and islands. The status of the disciples was determined by the teachers in the manors. Although the bright Serenity Cave was outside the sect, Qinsong School treated its disciples with respect when they went out. This was all because of Zhang Yan's reputation in the sect. Especially after he achieved Yuanying, things were different. Now that Grandmaster won first place in the sword competition, it was obvious that the status of the bright Serenity Lake in the sect had risen a lot. Zuohanzhang blinked. "Junior apprentice sister, if you are willing to lend me your blue jade cauldron for a few days, I will tell you. How about it?" Lin Xixue's beautiful eyes turned and she smiled. "Senior apprentice brother is blackmailing me again. Forget it, little sister won't ask you. If Grandmaster returns, senior Uncle Wei will definitely return. At that time, little sister will ask him. It's better than hearing things from others." Zuohanzhang wanted to say something, but he suddenly saw a golden light flying through the sky, the sound of it piercing through the clouds. It was extremely imposing. His body couldn't help but tremble as he exclaimed in a low voice, "Grandmaster has returned." Lu Yenni took a step forward and knelt on the ground. She said, "Disciple Lu Yenni, welcome back to Master's residence." The disciples of Clear Nether Manor also knelt down in unison. At that moment, no one dared to make a sound. Zhang Yan arrived on the wind and slowly descended from the clouds. After he stood firmly on the ground, his eyes scanned the area and he understood everyone's cultivation. He smiled and said, "Get up, follow me back to the mansion to talk." With a casual point of his finger, an array door rose in front of him. Then he rolled up his sleeves and a gust of strong wind swirled on the ground, pulling everyone into it. After arriving at the main hall of the mansion, because he remembered that he was about to leave and that he would be gone for a long time, he summoned his disciples one by one and gave them some pointers. He didn't even miss out on the third-generation disciples. Zhuangzhang and Lin Sixue knew that this grandmaster rarely passed down his techniques. Now that they were being taught, they were excited. Luo Xiao was very familiar with Zhang Yan's way of doing things. Seeing him like this, she had a thoughtful expression and said in a low voice to Shang, who was standing next to her, "Little sister Shang, go and prepare some spirit shells. The more of them, maybe master will need them." Shang didn't ask for the reason, nodded slightly, and went to do as she was told. About 2 hours later, Zhang Yan finally finished passing down his techniques. He then dismissed all the disciples, leaving only his eldest disciple, Lu Yenyi, behind. Master will not be able to stay for long after returning to the mansion this time. As for where I will be going, it is not convenient to say. This time, it will probably be 100 or 200 years before I can return. The matters of the sect will be in your hands. Lu Yenyi's face was calm, and she didn't ask for the specific reason. She just nodded seriously and said, "Disciple understands, master can rest assured." Zhang Yan looked at her with approval and said, "Other than that, there is one more thing. Yenyi, you need to go to the Fangchen courtyard. In the past, I promised a Taoist named Su Jing that after 3 years, I will take him in as a disciple of the Zhaoyu sect. It is inconvenient for me to do this, so you will go in my place." Lu Yenyi's jade face turned serious and said, "Disciple understands." Zhang Yan said, "After master leaves, there will be seniors in the sect to teach you divine arts and Taoist techniques. This matter was arranged by master in advance, so there is no need to worry." After explaining some matters, half a day had passed, and he ordered his eldest disciple to leave. He thought to himself, "Before I leave for Dongsheng continent, I need to inform senior brother Zhou." He thought for a moment, and because he was afraid that Zhou Changju wasn't in the courtyard, he cast a spell and sent a letter. Not long later, a letter came back, but it was said that Zhou Changju was still refining pills, and there were at least 5 more days before he could come out. Zhang Yan put down the letter and thought for a moment. He suddenly jumped down into the underwater manor, and in an instant he was in the depths of the Zhaoyu heavenly lake. When he got here, he felt the spiritual wave surging, and the waves gathered into a violent whirlpool, gathering at one place. He looked over, and saw that the god beast egg was peacefully lying on a rock in the water. The whirlpool was caused by it swallowing a large amount of spiritual energy. Luckily, this place was a cave abode, otherwise, it wouldn't be able to contain it, and it would have been sucked dry long ago. Zhang Yan circled around the thing twice, and felt that it wasn't time for it to come out of the shell. He didn't stay any longer, and jumped back into the cave abode, sitting on the jade platform. He then went into meditation. Just like that, a few days passed. On the 7th day, he woke up from his meditation, and after looking around, he jumped up and rode a streak of light towards Danding courtyard. After entering the mountain gate, he didn't face any obstructions, and in a short while, he arrived in front of the fishing tower. Zhou Changju sensed his arrival, and came out of the cabin with a delighted expression. "Junior brother, I have been waiting for a long time." Zhang Yan landed and wanted to bow, but Zhou Changju held him up, smiling. "We are brothers, so there is no need to be so distant." Zhang Yan didn't force him, and followed Zhou Changju into the room. After both of them sat down, they started to talk about their past. When he heard that on Zhang Yan's way back, there was a Yuxiao School's Paradise Venerable who intercepted him, Zhou Changju's eyes turned serious, and he said solemnly, "I already know about this matter. This person is called Zhou Ruiying, and we are of the same generation. She is from the Zhou family's concubine bloodline, and because of her outstanding talent, she was taken in by that old man Lingya to teach her Dao techniques. This was why Lingya took her in as a disciple and taught her techniques. Who knew that she had already formed a grotto heaven? There's one more Taoist heavenly abode in the Zhou clan, and he's even harder to deal with than before." When the Zhou clan was mentioned, although his expression was calm, his eyes were cold. At this moment, he seemed to have thought of something and said, "Junior brother, you don't have to worry. This person stopped you this time only because he borrowed the power of the 10 powers. With your current status, on this trip to the Dongsheng continent, you don't have to worry about him finding trouble with you. Otherwise, my Qinsong school will definitely not let this matter rest." Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. So senior brother Zhou already knows about this. Zhou Changju smiled and said, before the sect leader talked to you in detail, he had already told me. Your elder brother also agrees with this. You are going to the East Victory Continent. It might be a fortuitous encounter. Listening to his words, Zhang Yan seemed to have a deeper meaning. He asked, does senior martial brother have anything else to say? Zhou Changju smiled. He said, junior brother, I heard that Feng Haiyang borrowed Jun Yang's spiritual essence and broke through the third gate. Zhang Yan nodded and said, that's true. I only won by luck. After Zhou Changju asked in detail, he stroked his beard and said in a deep voice, it seems that this wind ocean Dharma body is undoubtedly the spirit Dharma body. Otherwise, it would be much more difficult for you to deal with it. Zhang Yan asked suspiciously, spiritual Dharmakaya? Zhou Changju glanced at him and said slowly, this matter is not recorded in the Taoist book, it is passed down by the various sects verbally, so junior martial brother does not know about it. The avatars of Yuanian cultivators were actually divided into 4 grades. Among them, the worst was known as the hidden aspect Dharma body. It was the result of using 5 types of impure qi in one's cultivation, causing one's cultivation method to be impure. As a result, after one's incarnation, one's future path would be severed, and they would not be able to reach the great path. Needless to say, the first grade is the spirit Dharma body. Most cultivators in the world condensed this Dharma body after achieving the 3rd realm. From what you said, Feng Haiyang's Dharma body must have been formed in a hurry. If there are no accidents, it is also the 2nd grade. Zhang Yan had never heard of this before, so he asked, what are the first 2 grades? Zhou Changju said, the 3rd grade is called illumination. The one who illuminates will be able to see both inside and outside, and his qi will be unobstructed. It is much more powerful than the spirit Dharma body. As for the 1st grade, it is called the Yuanjin Dharma body. This Dharma body is formed by the innate heaven, and it can be used to communicate with one's qi. Only those who have formed their Dan and above can try it. It is the most difficult to achieve among our generation of cultivators. I don't know about it in Qinsong school, but in the Zhou clan, only a few people have achieved this in the past 10,000 years. At this point, he turned around and said solemnly, junior martial brother, if you want to achieve great things in the future, you must achieve this Dharma body. Zhang Yan humbly asked, senior martial brother, do you have any wonderful methods to teach me? Zhou Changju knocked on the table and said in a deep voice, it is not easy to cultivate this Dharma body. Once a cultivator enters the 2nd realm, he needs to cultivate with the pure spiritual essence of heaven and earth, and must not be contaminated with any impurities. The Jun Yang Qi essence that you obtained is one of the 2 essences. However, other than this Qi essence, there is one more thing missing. He took out a leather bag from his sleeve and handed it over with both hands. He said, junior martial brother, keep it well. After Zhang Yan took it, he pointed at it and said, this item is called the White Moon Soul. I used a secret technique of the Zhou clan to collect several spiritual items to refine it. It contains the essence of the Kuan spirit. After you enter the 2nd realm, refine it together with the Jun Yang Qi essence, and you will get a miraculous effect. Zhang Yan thought for a while and asked curiously, senior martial brother, have you been preparing this item for a long time? Zhou Changju chuckled and said, ever since your Dan reached the 1st grade, I've spent dozens of years to refine this much. I originally wanted to try my luck, but I didn't expect junior martial brother to live up to my expectations and snatch back so much of Jun Yang's spiritual essence. My efforts weren't in vain. However, the rare ingredients required to refine this pill are too rare. The pill that I have refined can only last for a year at most. My pill formula is in that leather bag. After you go to the Dongsheng continent, you need to keep an eye out for it. If you can find some, you can refine it yourself. Zhang Yan couldn't help but sigh. On the road of cultivation, if there was a wise master to guide him, he could indeed avoid many detours. If Zhou Changju wasn't born in the Zhou clan and was an alchemy grandmaster, how would he know these things? For the next few hours, Zhou Changju was afraid that Zhang Yan would make a mistake in refining the pill, so he carefully told him about the taboos and tricks. When the sun was about to set, he was satisfied and let him go. Before he left, Zhou Changju suddenly thought of something and called out to him, "Oh yes, half a year ago, Qiyun Tian achieved the third realm of Yuanying. As you weren't in the mountain gate, I passed the gift on your behalf. If there's a letter, you don't have to run back." Zhang Yan thought of something and asked, "What grade is Senior Marshal Brother Qi's Dharmakaya?" Zhou Changju shook his head and said, "I've never seen it before. Based on Qi Yuntian's cultivation method, it is the most superior method in the Yutsong sect. His qi is also very pure. I think he must have at least obtained the illumination Dharmakaya." Chapter 616. Zhang Yan came out of the Danding courtyard and returned to the clear darkness heavenly lake. After sitting down in the hall, he started to think about going to Dongsheng continent. Before this, he intended to go to Shaoqing sect to ask for a sword technique, but after thinking about it, he felt that it was inappropriate. Firstly, Shaoqing was in the extreme west of Donghua, and his whereabouts should not be known by too many people, so it was inconvenient to go there. Secondly, after seeing Sun Huaying's flying sword technique, he didn't think that he could beat her in this aspect, so the time was not right yet. He could only look for another opportunity in the future. However, he was entrusted by the sect master to go to Dongsheng continent, not only to take over Shun Baishuang's residence, but also to expand it. There were many things to do, and it was not enough for him to do it alone. He needed to bring a few direct disciples with him to help. Lu Yenyi was the eldest disciple, so she had to guard the residence on his behalf and couldn't leave easily. Tian Kuan was dull and focused on cultivation, so he didn't like it. On the other hand, the Wang sisters hadn't reached the core transformation realm yet, so they couldn't learn the divine arts of the sect, so it was a good time to bring them along. Thinking of this, he said, "Zhang Jing, go get Kai Wei and Kading." The mirror spirit left, and after a while, the Wang sisters came to the hall and knelt down together, saying, "Disciple greets teacher." Zhang Yan raised his hand and gestured for the two to stand up, saying, "I called you here today because I'm going to travel again. You two can come with me." Hearing that they were going to Dongsheng continent, the two sisters had different reactions. Wang Kading's eyes shone with joy, while Wang Caiwei's expression was only slightly surprised, and then she calmed down. Zhang Yan smiled. With a flick of his finger, a light flew into Wang Caiwei's hand, and he said, "This is the ship of Dragon Country. It's a means of transportation for the three of us. Kaiwei, keep it well. Tomorrow, the two of you will leave the residence. Remember, don't fly, you have to go to the East Sea by land, and wait there. After I'm done, I'll come find you. Dongsheng continent was extremely far from Donghua continent, and they needed to cross the ocean. It would be easier if they used the astral wind to travel, but he didn't want too many people to notice him. He weighed the pros and cons. He decided that it would be better to travel by sea. Wang Kaiwei was beaming with joy. He said, "I will obey master's orders." Zhang Yan didn't say anything else. He waved his hand, and the Wang sisters bowed to him again. Then he retreated. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said to the mirror spirit, "Go and invite Mr. Zhang and Mr. Lu." Zhang Boyan and Lu Mainyang had escorted Wei Zihong back to the mansion a few days ago and were currently cultivating in the cave. Hearing that Zhang Yan was looking for them, they immediately rushed to the main hall to meet them. After the three of them greeted each other, Zhang Yan first said to Zhang Boyan, "Mr. Zhang, I need to go to Dongsheng continent for some reason. I'll leave in a while. I wonder if Mr. Zhang will stay or go with me." Zhang Boyan laughed and said, "I'm already a person without roots in Donghua. I've often heard that Dongsheng continent is full of spiritual resources and is several times bigger than Donghua, but I've never had the chance to see it. I'm willing to go with you, Chief." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "That's good." He turned his head again and said to Lu Mainyang gently, "If Mr. Lu sees Elder Yan, please pass on my message. I will remember all the help I've given you previously, and I will repay you in the future." Lu Mainyang smiled softly and said, "You're too kind, Chief. I was fortunate to be taken care of by you, and lived in a cave paradise to achieve what I have today. Speaking of which, it's me and my wife who owe you, Chief." Zhang Yan sighed. He would be gone for at least 200 years, and Lu Mainyang was already more than 700 years old. After this farewell, he was afraid that they would never meet again, so he stood up and bowed solemnly. He said, "Take care, Mr. Lu." Lu Mainyang also knew that she had no hope of achieving Tao, so she understood the meaning behind his words. She quickly returned the bow and said seriously, "Chief, please be careful on your journey." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Then we'll part ways here." He pointed with his finger, and the array door was immediately opened. He leaped up and instantly arrived at the peak of Zhaoyu Mountain. It was nighttime, and he saw a river of stars crossing the sky. He instantly felt his chest relax. He looked at the reflection of the stars in the heavenly lake, and said, "Mr. Luo, I think you already know about my matter. Are you willing to come with me?" After a while, a splash was heard, and Dragon Carp Luo Ren popped her head out of the water. She shouted, "This pool is too small, Master must bring me along." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Then follow me." Dragon Carp Luo Ren shook her body and turned into the size of a tadpole. Then she turned into a black line and flew up from the water, entering his sleeve. Zhang Yan called out to Zhang Boyan, who had just come out of the formation door. Then he circulated his Fa Li and shouted before charging into the clouds with his head raised. After that, he suddenly transformed into a ray of light and flew towards the south. When Zhang Boyan saw this, he also used his escape technique and followed closely. The two of them traveled for less than half a day, and in their field of vision, a continuous mountain range appeared. The ravines intersected, and the cliffs intersected. It looked extremely majestic. Zhang Boyan was shocked and thought, "If we go any further, we'll reach the mountain gate of Guangyuan sect, where the Windstream Mountain is located. That's right, the Manor Master should be here to see Shen Yinfeng." He thought for a while and then caught up. He cupped his hands and said, "I'm a cultivator of Netherworld Spring sect, and I have a grudge with Guangyuan sect. It's not convenient for me to go." Before enlightened Shinchong of Guangyuan sect ascended, he could be said to be undefeated in the 9 continents. At that time, he killed many disciples and elders of Netherworld Spring sect, and because of that, a huge grudge was formed between the two sections. Although he was now a right-hand man of Zhang Yan's residence, he still felt that it was inappropriate to enter the enemy's mountain gate. Zhang Yan thought for a while and understood his concerns and agreed, "All right, then Zhang, please go ahead first. I'll catch up later." Zhang Boyan immediately agreed, and with a dash, he turned into a yellow smoke and flew away, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Zhang Yan watched him leave, and then slowly pressed down on the cloud. He saw the fog in front of him, and knew that if he went any further, he would reach the mountain guarding formation. He took out a flying letter from his sleeve, and threw it into the air. It turned into a white light and flew into the mountain gate. In the next moment, a cloud of smoke flew out of the mountain gate, and arrived in front of them in an instant. A handsome young cultivator dressed in white came out, and when he arrived in front of Zhang Yan, he bowed and said respectfully, "Are you enlightened Zhang? The elder ordered me to come out and welcome you." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "There's a hidden path in front of you." Elder Shen didn't personally come out to welcome him, not because he treated him poorly, but because the flying letter told him that his whereabouts shouldn't be revealed, and that there was no need to make a big fuss. The young cultivator turned around and took out a talisman. He waved it in front of the mountain gate, and a golden light flew out from inside, and stopped in front of the two of them. He bowed again and said, "Enlighten Zhang, please." Zhang Yan stepped on the golden light, and the young cultivator waved the talisman again. The golden light retracted, and in an instant, they passed through the mountain gate's formation. He looked around, and directly in front of him was a mountain path that led straight into the clouds, and he could vaguely see flying cranes dancing around it. On the mountain ridge, there were golden palaces, jade pavilions, and jade platforms. Hundreds of jade rivers were hanging down from the walls, and falling from thousands of feet in the sky. The sound was like thunder, and it was deafening, and the aura was extremely majestic. He couldn't help but nod to himself. Guanyuan sect was indeed a great Xianmen sect in the past. Such a mountain gate was not something a small sect could compare to. At this moment, another disciple flew over from afar and said, "Xin Yong, the elder is waiting in the pavilion halfway up the mountain. Quickly bring the esteemed guest there." The young cultivator from before replied, "Understood." He waved the talisman again, and Zhang Yan suddenly felt the scenery in front of him change. He arrived at a place where green bamboos were swaying, birds were singing, and in front of a cliff, it was spring. In the midst of the greenery, there was a jade-white tree that was 5 feet tall, and its branches and leaves were wide open, shaped like a big crown, and looked like it was covered with frost and snow. Under the tree, there was an exquisite pavilion with a stone table and stone chairs. Elder Shen was standing in front of the pavilion with 2 attendants, and when he saw his arrival, he cupped his hands and said, "Enlightened Zhang, I apologize for not going out to meet you, please forgive me." Zhang Yan's body swayed, and he floated down. After he stood firmly on his feet, he smiled and returned the greeting, "Elder Shen is too polite." The 2 of them chatted for a while more, and then walked into the pavilion, and as the guest and the host sat down, Elder Shen ordered the attendants to bring over fine wine, fruits, and vegetables, and then they started toasting. After 3 rounds of wine, Zhang Yan put down the jade cup in his hand and asked, "Elder Shen, is it convenient to talk here?" Elder Shen stopped smiling, and he dismissed the attendants, saying, "This is my place of cultivation, and other than a few of my close disciples, no one comes in or out of here, so fellow Taoist can rest assured." Zhang Yan nodded slightly, took out the earthly golden shaft talisman from his sleeve, and placed it on the stone table, saying, "On my way back to the sect, it was fellow Taoist Shen's talisman that helped me escape a disaster, and now it's returned to its rightful owner." Elder Shen sighed and said, "I've also heard about this. Fellow Taoist was able to escape from those few people who, in the same generation in the world, can compare to you." Zhang Yan shook his head with a smile and said, "So what? If I don't enter the grotto heaven, I'm still a pawn in the end." He took out another jade bottle, handed it to Elder Shen, and said, "I still have important matters to attend to, and it's not convenient for me to stay here for long. There's a portion of Jun Yang's spiritual essence in this bottle, fellow Taoist, please keep it well." Although Elder Shen had an agreement with Zhang Yan before, when this spiritual essence was really placed in front of him, he couldn't help but breathe quickly, and he felt a burst of excitement. He slightly calmed himself down, took the jade bottle, and said solemnly, "If it's as short as 10 years, if it's as long as 30 years, I'll definitely have an explanation." Zhang Yan stood up and said, "Then let's set the deadline for 30 years, and at that time, I'll send a disciple over." He cupped his hands again and said, "Farewell." Elder Shen nodded, and he also stood up and returned the greeting. Then he said to the young cultivator, "Xin Yong, send Zhenren Zhang out of the mountain." Zhang Yan's body swayed, and he floated up, stepping on a ray of light. In just a moment, the scenery in front of him suddenly changed, and he was already outside the mountain gate. He stood in midair, and after thinking for a while, he took out a beautiful piece of jade, and said to a thin figure, "Fellow Taoist Su, the calamity of Donghua continent has already begun, and I want to send you to Dongsheng continent for reincarnation. This way, you can protect fellow Taoist, and you can also avoid the calamity. What do you think?" Taoist Su was originally a disciple of Chongyue True Temple, and if he reincarnated, he would be taken by the disciples and elders of his own sect to enter Tao in the future. But how could this compare to becoming a disciple of Zhang Yan, so he didn't think too much about it. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan put away the beautiful jade, and with a long roar he leaped up into the sky like a rainbow, looking toward the east. Chapter 617. The sea and sky were boundless, and the blue sky was clear as if it had been washed. However, there was a layer of dark clouds hanging at the end of the horizon, and it was like a thick black belt that was boundless in both directions. If one looked closely, one would be able to see countless bolts of lightning flickering and leaping about like silver snakes, and the sound of it spread out far and wide, and it could even be faintly heard from 5,000 kilometers away. At this time, there was a sudden loud sound, and in the thunderclouds, a ship thousands of feet long broke through the thick clouds and fog. The body of the ship shone with countless talisman light, reflecting a golden glow on the surface of the sea. At this time, the whole ship tilted down, and with a rumble it hit the surface of the sea, shaking and shaking, causing the surrounding waves to surge. It was only after a moment that it stabilized. On the deck, Wang Keating looked back at the dark clouds, patted her chest, and said with lingering fear, "Sister, we finally passed that ghost cloud." Wang Kaiwei heaved a sigh of relief as well. 100 days ago, thunderclouds would gather on the surface of the ocean from time to time. Every single time, a tempestuous wave would arise, and a myriad of bolts of lightning would strike down from time to time. Fortunately, the restrictions on the Dragon Tooth Ark were incomparably strong, and it was specialized in resisting the waves and bolts of lightning, so they were able to safely charge out of this expanse of thunderclouds. Zhang Boyan was also standing with the two of them, and he said in a low voice, "I heard the elders in the sect say that there are thousands of miles of dark golden thunderclouds outside the Dongxing continent. When the wind and clouds gather, lightning will wreak havoc, sweeping across the sea. Not only will the fish and birds hide, even the cultivators have to stay far away. Now it seems that it is true. If not for this ship, I'm afraid only the manor head could pass through without a scratch." At this time, a voice came from behind. "After passing this dark thundercloud, the Dongxing continent is not far away." Hearing the voice, the Wang sisters turned around. Wang Keating was even more surprised. "Master has come out of seclusion?" Wang Kaiwei frowned and pulled on her clothes, saying, "Still not kneeling?" Only then did Wang Keating wake up and hurriedly knelt down with her sister, saying respectfully, "Disciple welcomes Master out of seclusion." Zhang Yan walked over, smiled, and raised his hand, saying, "Get up, there are no outsiders here, no need to stand on ceremony." The two sisters stood up. Zhang Yan turned to Zhang Boyan and cupped his hands, saying, "I have been in seclusion for the past few days. Thank you, Mr. Zhang, for protecting my two disciples." Zhang Boyan cupped his hands. He said, "I'm ashamed. I only borrowed the boat's restriction, but even so, the restriction was mostly destroyed." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "It doesn't matter. I just need to spend some more time to refine it." He exchanged a few words with Zhang Boyan. He saw that the sea had already calmed down. He then returned to the room and sat down on the jade couch. It had been 15 months since they set sail from the Donghua continent. Although it seemed long, it was only a short instant for cultivators who frequently went into seclusion for dozens of years. During this period of time, due to the help of the Gantian Junyang essence qi, his cultivation improved by a lot. He calculated that after this ball of essence qi was completely refined, he would be able to successfully step into the second stage of yuaning. He originally wanted to use this chance to learn the spell that the sect leader gave to the talisman. However, he didn't expect that there was a restriction in the talisman that prevented him from viewing it. As such, he had to spend an hour every day using his spiritual power to force it out. Just now, he was slowly dispelling it. The sect leader's actions weren't without reason. He noticed that each time he activated the restriction, he would be able to verify a spell that he had learned long ago. Only today did he completely remove this restriction, and he had some guesses about its origins. He pointed at his forehead, and the acupoint jumped. A golden light shot out from within and landed on the table in front of him. It then turned into 2 talisman books. He bent over slightly and stretched out his hand to pick up one of them. He couldn't help but smile and thought to himself, "So it is like this." He shook the talisman and it turned into dust. He then picked up the other talisman book and opened it. He realized that it was a secret order given to him by the sect leader. His expression turned serious as he looked at it carefully. He frowned slightly and stood up. Looking at the calm sea, he thought to himself, "This is a tricky matter. I'm afraid even Zhenrenshin did not know about it beforehand." Back then, the founder of the Qinsong school had personally set up 6 restrictions. It was rumored that there were 6 ancient evil creatures sealed in them. No one knew where they were sealed in. However, This talisman book said that there was one hidden in the Dongsheng continent. Not only that, the sect leader had calculated through the spiritual tablet in the ancestral hall that this restriction was restless. It seemed that someone was setting up a restriction. If this continued, it would be broken within 100 years. Thus, he ordered him to find a way to deal with it and not let anyone else get it. Although Zhang Yan had learned about the location of the restriction from the letter, as a disciple of the Qinsong school, he was restricted by the ancestral master's order and could not make the first move. This was not a joke. Back then, the Su clan had plotted to steal the restriction of the ancestral master, which was why they were annihilated. Zhang Yan thought for a while. The contents of the letter were indeed unexpected. However, after thinking about it carefully, it was still an opportunity. However, the person who had the ability to break the restriction might be one of the major sects in the Donghua continent. He had no foundation in the Dongsheng continent, so it would not be easy for him to do this. He thought that he could only go to Shen Baishuang's side residence first. At this moment, a sharp whistling sound came from outside the cabin. Then, a rainbow of 7 colors exploded in the sky. It was used by cultivators to summon people of the same path. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He concentrated his energy in his eyes and looked into the distance. He saw dozens of large boats 100 miles away, forming a circle around a white python that had a beard under its chin and a body that was more than 100 feet long. Outside of this, there were hundreds of small boats, and the people on the boats were all bare-chested as they shouted loudly. Although the python was covered in blood, it still raised its head and hissed. Its ferocity was gone. At this moment, it suddenly flicked its tail. With a bang, it smashed the big boat into pieces. A few people could not dodge in time and were smashed into meat paste on the spot. The rest fell into the water. However, those people were extremely brave. Not a single one of them retreated. Instead, they ordered the boats behind them to come forward and block the gap. On the deck, Wang Kading's eyes lit up. Along the way, all she saw was seawater and she was already bored. Now that she saw such a scene, she felt that it was interesting. She pointed and said, "Sister, look at those people. They are not cultivators, but they dare to find trouble with the white spirit demon python. This demon is so big, it probably has 100 years of cultivation." Wang Kaiwei looked for a while and said, "Sister, look, the flying forks and nets that those people are using are refined by cultivators of my generation. They are not ordinary objects." Wang Kading pouted and said, "The spiritual energy is impure. The person who refined the instrument may not be as skilled as me." Wang Kaiwei smiled and said, "Looking at the method of refining the instrument, it is indeed not as good as sister. But it can be used to deal with this python spirit that has not yet taken human form." Wang Kading blinked her eyes and shook her head. "Sister, you are wrong. Xiao and the others seem to have surrounded the python spirit, but they can't do anything to it. The python spirit is very cunning. It looks like it is in a difficult situation, but it is actually exhausting its energy. It is waiting to catch its breath. Sister, look, it is not as good as those people." Wang Kaiwei was startled. She looked carefully again and was surprised. Just as the two of them were talking, the python spirit had smashed another 2 ships in succession, causing those people to be thrown into disorder for a while. But she just couldn't see any signs of it looking for an opportunity to escape. What her younger sister said was indeed correct. Zhang Yan was also paying attention to the movements of those people. After listening to Wang Kading's words, he nodded and said, "Kading's aptitude is indeed better than Siwei's. You are also very observant. If your thoughts were not so jumpy and focused on cultivation, your cultivation should have already seen the door of core formation." He pondered for a moment. Since those people were using magic tools, they should be related to cultivators. He said, "Kaiwei, Kading, those people are definitely not a match for the python spirit. You should go and help them. Also, ask them where this place is." When the Wang sisters heard the voice transmission, they did not dare to disobey and agreed in unison. Then, they each flew away on a ray of light. At this moment, on the dozens of big boats, a tall and sturdy man was giving orders. ordering the people on both sides to continuously throw flying pitchforks at the python spirit. But his expression was solemn, and there was a hint of anxiety in his eyes. He turned around and asked an old man, "Elder N, second uncle's fleet hasn't arrived yet, has it?" Although the elder was slightly older, he was still in good spirits. His robes were unbuttoned, revealing a chest that was as dark as iron. He laughed loudly and replied in a voice that was as loud as a bell, "It's even better that he didn't come. With over 300 ships and a few thousand men, can't we take down a heavily injured white spirit python? If we cut off this good body, we can definitely sell it for a good price in Celestial Gathering City." The sturdy man looked around and said in a low voice, "Eldarin, you may not know this, but half of the flying pitchforks have been stolen by someone. The ones left in the cabin are only ordinary items." Elder An's expression changed greatly. He grabbed the sturdy man's arm and said, "What happened? When did you find out? Why didn't I know? Why didn't you tell me earlier?" The sturdy man said apologetically, "I only found out about this when little E came to report. I didn't want to disturb the minds of the men, so I didn't say it clearly." Eldarin said angrily, "Someone is trying to harm you." However, the sturdy man shook his head and said, "Eldarin, now is not the time to think about this. I'm thinking about how to bring the men back safely." Elder An's expression was extremely solemn. If they didn't have enough magic tools, not only would they not be able to take down this demonic python, but they might also lose all of their disciples here. He grabbed the leather pouch at his waist and gulped down a few mouthfuls of wine. He said resolutely, "Give me all the flying pitchforks. I'll stall this demon. You take the men and leave. Take as many of them as you can. I'll entrust my little grandson to you." The sturdy man was startled. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly heard a cry in front of him. The demonic python swung its long tail, which was as thick as a water bucket. In an instant, it smashed another large boat into pieces. This time, it didn't retract its tail. Instead, it took advantage of the momentum and smashed two large boats in a row. Its remaining force was not exhausted, and it swept towards the two men. Their expressions changed abruptly, and they couldn't be bothered about anything else as they leaped into the water. But right at this moment, they heard a delicate shout as a bright and clear light descended, and with a swish, the python's tail was slashed cleanly into two. Chapter 6:18. P.S. There's one more update. In the evening, the white python spirit was killed in the blink of an eye. Both Senior and the robust man were stunned. When they raised their heads to look again, they saw two identical white-clothed young women standing in midair. Their sleeves fluttered in the wind, and only now did they come to a sudden realization. The burly man knelt down and respectfully said, "So it was the two immortal masters who helped us. I am Xiao Tong, and I thank you for saving our lives on behalf of the 3,000 men here." Wang Kading saw that although his attitude was respectful, there was no fear in his expression. It was obvious that this was not the first time he had dealt with cultivators. Her beautiful eyes turned and she smiled lightly. "There's no need to thank me. I'm here to ask you about something. Dealing with this little snake is just a matter of convenience." Eldarin walked to the bow of the boat and discreetly shielded Xiao En behind him. He said in a low voice, "I wouldn't dare. Please ask me anything, Immortal Master. I will tell you everything I know." There were quite a few disciples in the Xiao clan who had entered the Celestial sect, and they often came and went, but most of them came and went by means of instruments. They had never seen anyone who could fly in the air like this. They guessed that the two girls' magical powers were very high, so they were very careful. Wang Kading asked, "May I know where this place is?" A trace of surprise flashed through Elder An's eyes, but he quickly replied, "Reporting to Master Celestial, 300 kilometers from north to south and 280 kilometers from east to west are all within the boundaries of my Jingyu kingdom." Wang Kading asked curiously, "But I can see within 1,000 li. It's just an island." Eldarin bowed and said, "Master Celestial is right. That island is where my Jingyu country is located." Wang Kading chuckled, "So that's how it is. Your Jingyu kingdom isn't that big. Eldarin suddenly lifted his head and puffed out his chest. My Jingyu kingdom may not be big, but it has 300,000 citizens and more than 10,000 boats. Among the 300 kingdoms in the Western realm, we can be considered one of the best. Wang Kading was slightly surprised. Then, as if she had understood something, she withdrew her smile. He nodded. He asked, "Do you know how far the Dongxing continent is from here?" A confused expression appeared on Old An's face as he shook his head and asked, "Where is that?" This old man has never heard of it. At this time, the brawny man interrupted, "Immortal Master, are you talking about the location of the Chu Empire?" Wang Kading was a smart woman. She thought for a while. He felt that perhaps these mortals didn't know about the Dongxing continent. Thus, he cast his gaze towards the brawny man. "You speak." Upon hearing this, the burly man slightly bowed and pointed in a direction, saying, "Immortal Master, if you wish to find the Chu Empire, then you can go to the Chu Empire. 16,000 miles to the east from here is the territory of the Great Chu." Wang Kading saw that he seemed to be much easier to talk to than Eldarin, so she excitedly asked all sorts of questions. It was rare for her to be in a foreign land, so she was very curious and even listened to some interesting anecdotes with great interest. Wang Kaiwei saw that her questions were all unimportant, so she angrily glared at her and reminded her, "Sister, don't let benevolent master wait too long." Wang Kading stuck out her tongue and stopped talking. She waved her hand at the people below her, then rode the mystic light and returned to the Dragon Country's ship with Wang Kaiwei. Seeing the two of them leave, Olden wiped the sweat off his forehead and ordered someone to bring over a water bag. He wiped his mouth and said, "These two immortal masters are definitely not from the Celestial Gathering City." The brawny man hesitated for a while and said, "A few days ago, when Big Brother returned to the mansion, he said that if we see any cultivators from the outer seas, we must report to him. Eldarin, what do you think?" Olden was silent for a while, then he shook his head and said, "Who knows what happened in the city? It's not an exaggeration to say that these two immortal masters saved our children's lives. Why should we cause trouble for them? Just pretend that we don't know anything." The brawny man nodded and looked at the white spirit python in the water. He said excitedly, "If we catch this white spirit python demon, not only can we report back, we won't have to go out to sea for at least 2 months. Old An also smiled, but then his face darkened. He said, "When we go back, we must find out who is trying to harm you." At this moment, more than 10 miles away, there was a flying boat hovering in the sky. There were 3 people on it, and the leader was a middle-aged man in his early 40s. He had an extraordinary bearing and said with an unhappy expression, "Chief Steward Bai, where did this female cultivator come from? Didn't you say that the immortal masters in the Celestial City are welcoming the envoys from the upper sex today and that no one will come out?" The man who looked like a steward hurriedly bowed and said, "I dare not lie to you, old master. It's true. The 2 immortal masters came and went in a hurry. Judging by their clothes, they don't look like disciples of the Celestial Gathering sect. Perhaps they were wandering cultivators who happened to pass by and helped Xiao San Lang." The middle-aged man patted the flying boat and said unwillingly, "Xiao San is lucky. If we miss this opportunity, it will be difficult to find trouble with the Xiao family next time." Chief Steward Bai stole a few glances at him and said, "I think this isn't a bad thing." Recently, the Celestial City seems to be searching for cultivators from the outer seas. "Old Master, why don't you report this to the higher-ups and say that the Xiao family knew about it but didn't do it, and that they have ulterior motives?" The middle-aged man's eyes brightened, and he said, "Good idea. Quick, bring me the secret whistle." Chief Steward Bai hurriedly handed over a small whistle carved from gold and stone. The middle-aged man grabbed it, put it to his mouth, and blew on it. A faint, almost undetectable sound spread out. After a while, a person flew over on a cloud of smoke. This person's hair was tied into a bun, and his robe was embroidered with a fish and dragon coiling on it. There was a sword on his back, and his expression was extremely cold. He looked at the 2 people and said, "Are you the ones who called me?" The middle-aged man hurriedly knelt down and said, "Yes, it is me." I have something important to report to you. The Taoist said coldly, "Speak." The middle-aged man immediately told him what happened just now, but he felt a gust of wind around him. When he looked up again, there was no trace of the person in front of him. At this moment, the Wang sisters were riding a mysterious light back to Dragon Country's ship. Halfway there, they suddenly saw a cloud of smoke flying through the air, and when it stopped in front of them, they subconsciously stopped and looked over cautiously. They saw a young Taoist blocking their way. He had a fierce aura, and his gaze was aggressive. He looked at them and said, "Where are the two of you cultivators from?" Wang Kading heard his unfriendly tone and snorted, "And who are you? Why do you care what we do?" Wang Kaiwei didn't say anything, but secretly kept the Yin killer blade in her sleeve. The Taoist said proudly, "Let me tell you, I am the Sea Patrol Gongsun Zhang of the Celestial Civ sect. The Celestial Civ sect has a rule that all cultivators from the outer sea who enter the ocean realm must be under my control. If the two of you know what's good for you, tell me where you are from. If not, I will capture you and bring you back to Celestial Civ City, and then you will suffer." The three of them were only about 70 to 80 miles away from Dragon Country's ship. At this moment, everything that happened was clearly seen by Zhang Yan, but he didn't move. Zhang Boyan looked outside and asked, "Master, do you want me to do something?" Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled. "No need, jade can't be used if it's not polished. That person is just a small golden core cultivator, and his cultivation is not much higher than Sideways. Let them deal with it themselves." As long as the Qinsong school was under the same master and disciple line, most of them would go out to look for medicine before they formed their golden core. Half of it was for training, and the other half was to look for fated chances. Ever since the Wang sisters entered Dao, they mostly cultivated in the clear nether heavenly lake. Zhang Yan brought them to Dongsheng continent with the intention of training them. Unless they were in a life-or-death situation, he wouldn't do anything. On the other side, Gongsun Zhang spoke again, but he was ridiculed by Wang Kading. He was angry and didn't waste any more words. He opened his fingers and released a white smoke that spun like a waterfall. Immediately, a strong suction force was generated, as if it wanted to pull the two of them over. The two Wang sisters were already prepared, so they controlled their profound light and stabilized their bodies. Wang Kading shouted and threw an item into the sky. It was a jade talisman, and as soon as it rose into the air, 4 rays of light, green, purple, red, and blue, came crashing down. This treasure's original name was Sunken Tree Tablet. It was obtained by Zhang Yan from the Middle Pillar continent. Before he came to the Dongsheng continent, he saw that Wang Kading did not have a suitable magical treasure, so he simply gave it to her. Gongsun Zhang didn't care about the two profound light realm cultivators at first, but when he sensed the great power of the 4 rays of light, his expression changed drastically, and he exclaimed, "Profound artifact?" At this moment, it was too late to dodge. He shouted and spat out a cloud of smoke from his stomach, which turned into layers of clouds in front of him. When the 4 rays of light came down, the wind, fire, water, and lightning all shot out at the same time. Although his body was shaken, the smoke didn't dissipate. At this moment, Wang Kaiwei floated over and went behind him. With a twist of her finger, a fierce saber light rose up and slashed in the air, cutting off one of Gongsun Zhang's arms. The Taoist was stunned for a moment, and he couldn't help but scream in pain. When Wang Kading saw that he had an opening, she was about to use her treasure to kill him, but Zhang Yan's voice sounded in her ears. "Disciple, this person is still somewhat useful. Bring him to me." When Wang Kading heard this, she immediately retracted some of her arcane power. Although she didn't kill this person because her master ordered her not to, she still wanted to make him suffer a little. She pointed with her slender finger, and the 4 rays of light from the treasure tablet landed. Like lightning, half of Gongsun Zhang's body was charred, and he fainted on the spot. She snorted and spread out her profound light, bringing this person over. She called out to Wang Kaiwei and flew back to the Dragon Country ship. Soon she returned to the ship, and as soon as she landed on the deck, she went into the cabin to greet Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan looked at the unconscious Gongsun Zhang and took out a pill from his sleeve. He said, "Let him eat this." Wang Kating took it and stuffed it into Gong Sun Zhang's mouth. She threw it on the ground and moved to the side. After a while, the effect of the pill was liquefied, and Gong Sun Zhang slowly woke up. As soon as he opened his eyes, he rolled over and took a few steps back, holding his broken arm. He looked around and said fiercely, "Who are you? Do you know that I'm the Sea Patrol envoy of the Celestial Civ sect? If you dare to harm me, the Celestial Civ sect will not let you go." Zhang Yan smiled. With a thought, he manifested the 3 strong clouds above his head. 2 of them were solid, and the last one was illusory. They all emitted 5-colored light in the air. When Gong Sun Zhang saw this, his expression changed drastically. His eyes were filled with fear, and he cried out, "Yuanying Great Cultivator?" Zhang Yan's action was to test him. Looking at his reaction, he immediately had some idea of the Celestial Civ sect's strength. He smiled faintly and said, "Fellow Taoist Gong Sun, I have just come to your place, and there are some things that I don't understand. I hope you can tell me the truth." Chapter 619. Although Zhang Yan had sent the Wang sisters to gather information, Elder In and the others were not cultivators, so their knowledge was limited. However, Gong Sun Zhang was different. If the cultivators of the Dao sect in the Sea region wanted to know about the Dongsheng continent, it was best to get the information from him. Facing the Yuanying cultivators, Gong Sun Zhang's arrogance was swept away, leaving only fear. He didn't dare to hide anything. After a round of questioning, Zhang Yan found out that the Dongsheng continent was different from the Donghua continent. There were many vassal states in the continent, and they all had cultivation sects supporting them. Among them, there were 5 major celestial sections. Behind Dachu was Zhongtai's celestial sect. Celestial Luo sect was the largest cultivation sect in the Shiji realm. It was worshipped by the overseas states and governed millions of people. Every day, they hunted and killed monsters in the sea, collected seashells, pearls, and other rare treasures, and traded them for treasures, pills, and other cultivation items. Other than that, there were hundreds of cultivation families of various sizes scattered across the vast sea. In name, they all served Celestial Luo sect as their sect leader. Although this sect was not small, the only person with Yuanying cultivation was the city lord. Compared to the 5 sects, they were still far behind. Zhang Boyan said, "In this case, the Shiji Sea is just a desolate place compared to the Dongxing continent." Gong Sun Zhang lowered his head and said, "My Celestial Civ sect used to be powerful for a time, occupying 2 seas of the 5 seas realm. About 100 years ago, a group of demonic cultivators came from the other continents and fought with us in the Beima Sea. We lost a lot of our forces and had no choice but to retreat to the West GC. But when it rains, it pours. More than 10 years ago, a demon ran amok in the sea, devouring all the living creatures in the sea. The few great cultivators of our sect had no choice but to stop it. After this battle, although we managed to severely injure the demon and drive it away, 2 of our elders died. Only my master managed to escape with his life. Since then, our sect's vitality has been greatly damaged and we have yet to recover." A demon from another continent? Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly. He thought for a moment and said, "I was passing by and wanted to visit your city lord. Where should I go?" Gong Sun Zhang hastily said, "Go northeast for 3,000 li. There's a majestic mountain over there called Diyue, and that's where the Celestial Gathering Mountain Gate is located. I'm the direct disciple of the city lord, and I'm willing to introduce you to all of you. Knowing that the few of you have arrived, my master will definitely be delighted." He was well aware of the Celestial Civ sect's current predicament. Moreover, he was only a small golden core cultivator. If a perfected Yuanying cultivator killed him, the city lord would never avenge him. For the sake of his own life, he was extremely obedient right now, his mouth full of flattery. Zhang Yan waved his hand and said, "This matter is not urgent. I still have something I don't understand. Fellow Taoist Gongsun, why are you looking for trouble with my 2 disciples?" Gong Sun Zhang revealed a terrified expression and said, "Please don't blame me, perfected one. Recently, a supreme treasure from the upper sex Zhong Tai was stolen. Rumor has it that the thief came to our West G ocean boundary. Hence, the city lord ordered that all visitors from the outer sea must be strictly interrogated, and I'm just following orders." Zhang Boyan snorted and said, "Everything in the world that can be called supreme treasures all contains spirituality. How can it be stolen? Who are you trying to fool with this kind of nonsense?" Gong Sun Zhang laughed dryly and said, "It's not like I don't know the specifics, I'm just following what others say." Zhang Yan thought carefully, and his eyes flickered. He said, "Perhaps this treasure isn't a talisman, but a cultivation technique." Gong Sun Zhang was shocked and said, "Perfected one, are you saying that it might be a secret tome of divine arts and Taoist techniques?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This is I's wild guess, don't take it seriously." Gong Sun Zhang nodded. Zhang Yan looked at his cowering expression and smiled. He said to Wang Kaiwei, "Disciple, bring me a brush and paper." "Yes, master." Wang Kaiwei spread out the paper in front of the table and placed the brush and inkstone on the table. Then she picked up the paperweight and pressed it on both ends. Zhang Yan picked up the brush and wrote down a series of rare treasures on the paper. He then passed it to Gong Sun Zhang and said, "Since your master is cultivating, I won't disturb you anymore. Celestial Gathering City is a gathering place for celestial guests from all over the world, so there should be many rare treasures there. I want to buy some. When Taoist Gong Sun goes back, why don't you keep an eye out for some?" Gong Sun Zhang was in disbelief and said, "Perfected one, you're letting me go just like that?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If Taoist Gong Sun doesn't want to leave and wants to stay here for a few days, that's fine." Gong Sun Zhang's face turned pale and he quickly waved his hand. He didn't dare to stay here anymore. He carefully folded the white paper and put it away. He bowed with one hand and said, "Then I'll go back now." He was afraid that Zhang Yan would change his mind, so he quickly bid farewell and left the Dragon Country ship. He then flew away in a cloud of smoke. But after a while, he suddenly thought of something. He gritted his teeth and said, "If those two didn't harm me, I wouldn't have lost an arm. I'll go kill them first to vent my anger." Those two people were not Taoist cultivators, so he used a spell and immediately calculated their location. After determining the direction, he quickly flew in that direction. Although the middle-aged man and chief steward had left a long time ago, the sea area was vast and they had not gone far. In a short while, he caught up with them. The two of them saw him rushing over and were shocked. Before they could say anything, they saw a cloud of smoke coming down on their heads. The two of them did not even make a sound before they were ground into a pile of bloody mud in an instant. Instantly, Gong Sun Zhang felt much better. He snorted coldly, then used his escape art and headed northeast. 6 hours later, he returned to Celestial Gathering City. Looking down from the sky, there were many buildings, halls, and platforms. The surroundings were filled with beautiful flowers and grass, stretching from the foot of the mountain all the way to the peak. One could still see the prosperity of the city in the past. There was a majestic pagoda hall on the peak. On both sides of the hall, there were golden bridges that extended into the clouds. They looked like two wings flying in the sky. It looked magnificent and extraordinary. Gong Sun Zhang landed in front of the pagoda hall and reported to the boy guarding the door. After waiting for a while, he heard someone calling him in. He entered the hall with familiarity and knelt down. Disciple Gong Sun Zhang greets master. On the cattail hassock in the main hall sat an 80-year-old Daoran. His hair and beard were sparse and his facial features were squeezed together. This person was the Celestial Gathering City Lord, Gong Sun Su. In the battle with the demon more than 10 years ago, he only survived, but his face was damaged. Although he used spiritual medicine to repair it, it was still ugly. As a cultivator, he didn't care about his appearance, but he was the lord of a city. Because of this, it was hard for him to see others, so he hid in the hall to cultivate. Unless it was necessary, he rarely went out. Gong Sun Su looked at him weakly and said, "Why are you missing an arm?" Gong Sun Zhang didn't dare to hide anything and told him the reason. After Gong Sun Su heard it, he said solemnly, Did you see clearly that there were 3 clouds above Priest Zhang's head? Gong Sun Zhang said with certainty, I didn't see wrongly. Gong Sun Su waved at him and said, let me take a look at that paper. Gong Sun Zhang quickly opened the paper and handed it over. Gong Sun Su took a few glances. He showed a confused expression. Some of these were herbs. Some were golden jade, some were spirit cores, and some were things he had never heard of before. But he couldn't tell what they were used for. What was written on the paper? It was the medicine used to refine by Yuangshi. However, Zhang Yan left out a few important things and purposely added a few things that looked right but weren't, so people couldn't tell them apart. Gong Sun Zhang asked carefully, Master, do you want to see them? Gong Sun Su said angrily, what do you want to see? Now that I look like this, am I going to embarrass myself? Give them whatever they want and send them away as soon as possible. As the two of them were talking, a cultivator in white walked into the hall. His clothes were simple and clean, without a speck of dust. He walked closer and sat down without any hesitation. He smiled and said, Master and junior brother, who are you sending away? Gong Sun Su said angrily, aren't you going to accompany the envoy? What are you doing here? The cultivator in white said indifferently, what does the treasures that were lost in the mountain have to do with me? Even if I find them, I won't get any benefits. He glanced at Gong Sun Zhang and said, what happened to junior brother? Why did you lose an arm? Gong Sun Zhang smiled bitterly and told the story again. In the end, he said hatefully, I was tricked by those 2 scoundrels, otherwise, I wouldn't have ended up like this. The white-robed cultivator revealed an interested expression and asked, Junior Marshal brother, you said that their restriction boat is over 3,000 meters long? Gong Sun Zhang nodded and said, yes. The cultivator in white was secretly shocked. A ship that seemed to have a seal on it and needed to be refined from a huge earthly fire heavenly cauldron, the other party's background was not simple. He thought to himself, my master once said, to go to that place, it's best to have a few people with profound skills and no foundation. This group of people is just right. Thinking about this, he said to Gong Sun Zhang, junior brother is the most skilled in painting in our sect. Since you've seen these 4 people, can you draw their faces and let me take a look? If it's good, I'll help you regrow your arm. How about it? Gong Sun Zhang's body trembled and he said in surprise, really? The cultivator in white said, when has junior brother ever seen me joke about this? Gong Sun Zhang took out a brush and a paper. He raised the brush and in a split second, he pushed it forward and said, take it. The cultivator in white took it and looked at it. He saw the 2 beautiful women on the paper and they looked like real people. He couldn't help but click his tongue and said with a smile, this painting can be said to be a treasure. Junior Marshal brother is really generous. Gong Sun Zhang ignored him and held his breath for a while. In the end, he took a deep breath and sketched out Zhang Boyan's appearance. The cultivator in white walked to his side and saw an old man with a thick demonic aura and a pair of eyes that looked like they wanted to devour people. He felt a chill and immediately put down the painting. He nodded and said, not bad, there's still one more person. But this time, Gong Sun Zhang raised the brush and put it down. After a few times, his eyes suddenly lit up, the tip of the brush suddenly fell down, but after a while, he threw the brush, pointed and said, is Xixiang satisfied? The white-robed cultivator moved closer and saw that this time, only a back was drawn. However, with just a glance, he was shocked to see a majestic Taoist standing in front of him. He suddenly felt like he was looking up at a tall mountain. He couldn't help but hold his breath. After a while, he praised, good drawing. He carefully put away the 4 paintings and took his leave. Full of vigor, he walked out of the room and handed them to a servant who was waiting there. He said, send them to 6th brother. Tell him that these people are of great use to me. If they come to the Chu country, treat them well. If they are negligent, I will hold him responsible. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.